Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's November 1st, 2022. I am in the studio with my beloved Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hey, so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you riding shotgun. Today, we are so super excited to have with us in studio Amanda and Shaye Scott. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hi. Woot woot.
All the way up from St. George. They left late last night after trick-or-treating. For those of you who have no idea who this, many of you will probably recognize this couple. Recently, they came out with a video on YouTube called Why We Left the Mormon Church, a coming out story. Between YouTube and Facebook, it's got like 600,000 views, very well produced, great cinematography, great storytelling, lots of fun clips of photos and even videos of like their Mormon journey. But in that video, they talk about their upbringing. Shaye talks about a patriarchal blessing that he got that was very influential. Amanda talks about how polygamy played a role in her journey. Shaye talks about gender dysphoria. And then they both kind of talk about their faith journey. But it's a super effective video. And a gazillion people reached out to us and said, you need to interview Shaye and Amanda. So we're doing it. Many of you won't know that they're both very accomplished individuals, in addition to having three children through in vitro fertilization, at least two of the three. So there'll be some infertility discussion today. But also, Shaye is one of the founders of, I guess, one of the executive producers or founders of the Piano Guys. So a lot of those amazing, or all or many of those amazing Piano Guys videos on YouTube, Shaye was an important part of. Amanda has done some recording as a musician, as a singer. She is a professor at Utah Tech, down formerly Dixie College down there in St. George. And in her story, she's going to be talking about being laid off from BYU Idaho for not having an active temple recommend. So we've got the BYU faculty worthiness temple recommend angle, but we're also going to be talking about navigating faith during COVID and LGBTQ themed issues, etc. So it's going to be one of those powerful, epic Mormon stories. So again, Shaye and Amanda, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah.
Can I ask something
Please,
just before we begin that I think I would like to actually start asking a little bit more in our interviews about pronouns that you prefer and identify with. That way we can honor.
He, him for me. So.
How about
and she, her.
and she, her?
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Thank you. Perfect. Beautiful. Is there anything either of you want to say? Sometimes people like to state their intention up front. There's always kind of like, for many, why would you go on Mormon Stories? Some would say you must hate the church. You must want to tear the church down. You must want to take people's faith away. Those are some of the common accusations that are made. And so sometimes people like to state their intentions. So Amanda, why don't you go first, and then Shaye, if either of you want to state anything about your intentions.
I would say with our journey, the thing that has helped me heal the most has been people building bridges from this upbringing and faith that I loved, that fed me in many ways, and this new world of, feeling like you can look at yourself and everything around you in a completely different way. That's really my intention, is being honest about the things that have been hurtful and that I see as very problematic. Also seeing the good in the lay membership, that's been something huge in our journey. So much goodness, and trying to build that bridge. I think we're all trying to heal. We're all trying to be as whole as we can and be forces of good. And I think people that are fully believing in the church fit right into that. So it's about bridge building for me.
Perfect. Thank you. Shaye?
Yeah, it's funny. This is something we struggled a lot with, even in finding the strength to post this video, is a lot of comments we got from people were like, why would you even put this out there? Why would you talk about this? And And in many ways, we're posting the video for people like that, just because I think it's important to understand that, as we state in the video, sometimes what is sacred for some people is traumatic for others. And so for me, you know, this is my lived experience. And I understand that's not going to be everyone's lived experience, but if by talking about this, I'm able to save a life or better a life, it made the whole thing worth it. So,
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. Well, what we often do with a couple, we love having couples just because we love multiple perspectives. And but what we like to do is just kind of go back and forth at different phases of your journey. This will probably be at least a 2-part. We'll kind of talk about at least their early years in Mormonism and the early years in their marriage and their relationship. That's kind of like the build. And then there'll be maybe some of the tension and some of the reconstruction maybe in the second part. So the first part's going to just be about the beginnings of your Mormon story. So should we begin with you, Shaye?
yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Where does your Mormon story begin?
So I am the youngest of 10 kids. It's funny. I feel like I'm repeating what I've said.
10
in the video.
kids.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So 10 kids, and my parents are late 70s, 80s right now, and so they come from a generation where the more kids you had, the more blessed you were.
Right. Right.
So, my family moved from Upland, California, before I was born, migrated to St. George, Utah, back before I think there was just a few stoplights. Lived in Bloomington, Utah, which was just this area out in the middle of nowhere, which is vastly different now.
Yeah.
It's funny, people talk about the bubble of living in Utah. I look at St. George as another bubble, and then on top of that, you got Bloomington, which is a bubble within the bubble, and that's how I describe it.
10 kids, that's a lot. What was your dad's, and did your parents come kind of pioneer stock? Were they converts? Were they long time?
Yeah, so gosh, do you know how far Amanda's like?
Yeah, your dad's line is pioneer stock because it ties into my line, which is pioneer stock.
Yeah.
Way back.
Oh, that's right.
We're like 16th cousins or something like that.
We're related, yeah. So,
Distantly.
But yeah.
And then your mom's line, I think it goes back like maybe 4 generations to like Oklahoma area. Shaye has some indigenous heritage.
10 kids. That's kind of like, was it kind of Saturday's Warrior vibes where your parents were like hearing the church's admonitions that no success can compensate for failure in the home, that you should have as many kids as possible, that birth control is kind of evil, that the mom should stay home and take care of the kids, and that the dad should provide. Very traditional Mormon family vibes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was something that was talked about actually kind of often in my home. I remember my mom would often look at families that were smaller and sometimes make comments that, they're not having as many kids as they should or could. And very much a culture of, it's all about the family, and, the more kids you have, and that's a great blessing that we're receiving from the Lord. Right. So
it's almost like God will bless you. The more kids the bigger your posterity, the more blessings you'll get from God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And for women in particular, it's like the more virtuous, you're more identified with that role as like, really overachieving kind of.
And I've heard them articulate, if the spirits don't come down into these faithful homes, then where would they go? That kind of,
Right.
I don't know if that's
They'll
70s,
go to
80s.
less valiant, faithful homes.
Yeah, it's
Right.
really a horrifying
Yeah.
thought. Like, how could you not want to have as many kids as possible? Where would these spirits go?
Yeah. So you were the youngest of 10?
Youngest of 10. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I was
What's the age? What's the difference in age between you and your oldest sibling?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. So my oldest is in her 60s. Yeah, old enough to be my parent.
Wow.
So 22
Something.
years,
Yeah, it's like 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
a 2-year span.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your mom went through a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Just lots of kids. And my dad commuted. He originally started in California working at the LA jails there. And then he, when they moved to St. George, he worked at Area 51. So it's it's a really exciting story to tell people.
That's Department of Defense, and it's been associated with UFOs, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's probably nuclear testing or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
he was security, but none of us believed it. We all thought he was in some lab doing so.
Working on aliens, dissecting aliens, or building UFOs, or
exactly.
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
When you think about yourself as a child, what do you remember about yourself? Like, that could be things that you enjoyed doing, how you kind of showed up in your family system, and how you felt at home. Like, what do you remember? How would you describe yourself?
I don't know. I just wanted to follow in the footsteps of my siblings, and so a lot of the times I was playing with my older brothers, or I recall just spending a lot of time with just neighbors down the street. Everyone was Mormon. You didn't second guess that. It was just very much a part of our community, and for the most part, it was very comforting. I felt like felt very loved for my parents. Felt like they really had a lot of interest in my life and what was going on. So.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So do you think of your Mormon childhood as being happy?
I do. For the most part. It's so hard when you don't know anything to compare it to. When you're raised this way, this is your reality, right? So for the most part, I was happy. There's obviously some stumbling blocks that were presented in my life that.
You know what? Let's go ahead and talk about that, since it's just kind of in the timeline. So are you saying that in some ways you maybe felt a little different than other kids, or felt like there was something that wasn't quite fitting your environment?
When you think back on your childhood and you think about your earliest memories, it's interesting. You ask people that, and like, what do you remember? And sometimes it's something traumatic. Sometimes it's something that was exciting. And for me, my earliest memory that I recall, I was around 3, probably close to 4. And I remember experiencing what I now have language for, was gender dysphoria. And I remember being in a room playing with some friends of mine, and they were playing house. They're saying, "You be the mom, you be the dad." And one of them pointed and said, "You be the dad." And I remember just like, it was like this push-pull effect that you see in the movies, where it was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not going to be the dad. I'm going to be the mom, and it was something that was so impactful on my little brain. I just remember that very distinctly. I remember also kind of creating a lot of stress and confusion. But of course, when you're that young, you don't know how to formulate exactly what's happening. It's kind of hard because these are experiences I had, throughout my whole life. I honestly don't know if there was a day in my life that I didn't think about that.
Some of the stereotypical areas where people would think about are athletics or sports, toys you play with, things that you were interested in. Margie and I have done a lot of studying about gender and the gender binary and how problematic it is. But growing up, it's like pink is girls, blue is boys, boys become firemen or policemen, women are mommies. Were there other areas that come to your mind now as being very pronounced, or even then, where the gender dysphoria kind of really felt prominent?
Yeah, it's interesting. My friends, for the most part, all through elementary, were neighbor girls that I played with. I think you often hear in these stories like, oh, they played with Barbies and stuff like that. I don't think I even thought about that. I didn't think about like a gender that I would associate with like what toys you played with. I just expressed myself how I wanted to. And yeah, it wasn't the story of like I grabbed pink all the time. Although there were times where I remember thinking like, this is what I want to do, and very distinctly having an experience where, it's like, oh, you can't go in that room because that's the girls' room. And I remember thinking like, why does that matter? So things like that, I think, stuck out to me a lot, more so when I was younger. And then, of course, as I got older, understanding what was happening, getting a lot of pushback, you start to go, oh, that's bad. So that's where it started.
What's bad?
That a boy is to behave this way, or boy is not to do this, or boy is not to go into a girl's room, or boy. Hearing that a lot, I think, started to build this kind of trauma within, where I started to realize like, oh, I'm not allowed to be perform left-handed or be left-handed, even though that felt way more natural to me. It was like I needed to just show up in the world in a certain way.
You've mentioned too that boys make fun of girls, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
that's, just kind of the slurs boys use. That's a bad thing. To be girly or anything associated with girls can be bad.
And I started to be teased. I remember in elementary school early on, kids bullying me. And of course, not knowing what, I thought honestly I was the only person on this planet. And you hear this so often now, but I thought I was the only person on this planet experiencing what I was experiencing. And so when I started to develop that shame around that, I just thought like, I can't talk about this, or this is something I have to figure out. And I remember kids in school, my name's Shaye, they would call me Shaylee Gailey, which, and it was like this really rude, derogatory way that let me know that I didn't fit in. But that has to do with sexuality. So I didn't know,
Right.
I didn't know what to think of that. It's just like, so I just remember having a hard time early on. So
To this day, and that's why we're so grateful you're willing to talk about this. To this day, people still have no clue of just the basic sexual attraction is totally different than gender identity.
Yeah.
And they just, oh, you're a boy who wants to play with dolls, you must have been gay. And how you present gender-wise or feel inside gender-wise
Right.
has nothing to do with who you're attracted to necessarily.
And gender
right?
expression too.
Yeah,
Gender
yeah,
expression
exactly.
being something that people mistake for
Yeah.
like sexuality, where you're like, yeah, they're completely
Totally
Oh,
different
yeah.
things.
different.
yes, and that's something that I just learned in recent years, and that's what's so interesting is looking at this. Is I look at that, and you're trying to make sense of how everyone in society puts you into a box and says, well, this is how stereotypically you should act if you're gay, or this is how you should act. I didn't know. I didn't have language for what I was experiencing, and the only thing that I could look at was I remember watching. Like my siblings would be watching like Maury on TV, and they'd bring out all these. I guess
Trans women or drag queens,
drag,
probably, depending on the episode.
But the way they would present it, it was almost like, well, I'm not that either. So what's going on? And I just really knowing from an early age that there was something that I was not fitting into, and especially being raised where I was, it was just like, I couldn't imagine that anyone else was experiencing what I was experiencing. And just hearing how people would talk about like, you watch these shows like, oh, that's the world and this is so wicked. And so I just thought, oh, there's something within me that makes society feel uncomfortable.
So
Yeah, I was just going to say that's so powerful, that point about, the power of language, basically being able to have a language and an understanding for yourself and who you are and what happens when we don't have the language and we aren't given that connection or understanding, that oftentimes children naturally then just start, with what resources they have and what they're given, they start creating narratives or beliefs about themselves that oftentimes revolve around shame and instead. And that's really powerful, that simple difference of and that's something that's so, I feel like, achievable, like having our children grow up with language of all the things that how they can show up and how they can, and also letting it be fluid, that you don't have to decide either.
Yeah.
So just a powerful, powerful point.
Yeah.
And I look at that messaging from, our growing up years about gender fluidity, about trans people. And it's this message of like, there's deception, it's this moral deception that these people, one of those Maury shows might have, my boyfriend's really a woman or something like that. And there's so much phobia. And when you start to, it's no wonder that there's so much queer phobia in our world, because you look at the representations, even up until even a decade ago, and they're all just negativity, mistrust these people, don't believe them, or pity them. They're to be mocked. So it's like, it's really heavy when you look at how our society has treated queer people in the past.
Or like with Silence of the Lambs, they're serial killers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like,
And that stays with people.
Yeah.
Like they, that association is there.
Yeah.
And it's very purposely constructed in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's not
important.
good.
Yeah. It was a feeling of like, oh gosh, I look at my childhood and I feel like I'm still working through this in a lot of ways. it's just, it's like you're holding your breath your whole life, and for me, looking at that and then reframing it, it's been such a healing process, but also very traumatic to realize that what I was essentially doing to myself and not being able to be heard and it's hard for me because I don't look at my parents like I blame them. I look at they're the product of their system, right? And they're just echoing what they've been told. And I've told them that, like, I don't blame them for anything. They were doing their best. Mm. And they're just following the culture and more importantly, these prophets, seers, and revelators who are telling them how to interpret things like this. And
so going back to the nicknames and the ways people made fun of you, was it because, there's ways you wanted to look, whether it's dress or hair, and then there's activities you were interested in, whether it's sports or theater or drama or whatever. Were there ways that you presented or activities you were not engaged in or engaged in that were signals to other people that you were different? Or did you try and hide and mask all that?
Yeah. It's funny. In elementary, I didn't think about that a lot. So I would assume that the bullying came from a place of my behavior. And it's hard to think that I don't remember consciously trying to think to be a certain way. I just was, As I got older, though, I started to be more conscious of that. And as I started to develop friendships with boys, I would start to see how they behave. And I remember trying to mimic that, right? And a very pivotal part for me was around the age of 10 and 11 years old. I really started to suffer a lot. And looking back, I guess this is kind of more common than I realized, but I came to a point where I couldn't even focus in school. I couldn't really, my parents had to pull me out of school and put me into a private school because I couldn't focus, and I couldn't do the work that I needed to do. And I remember this is something that it was something that was such a hard time for me because I started to feel really suicidal. And this probably lasted for a good year of my life, where I remember I would go to bed and I'd wake up with so much anxiety. And I think looking back on it now, it had a lot to do with this idea that this core part of me needed to come to the surface, and I needed to figure this out and talk about it. And that's when I found the courage to talk to my parents about it.
Okay, so I was going to ask, did you write in your journal at the time? How would you have? Let's just say you did or didn't write in your journal. If at the time you would have written in your journal, what would you have written? And what I'm referring to is we often don't even have the language or the role models or the schemas to even understand what we're going through. So how would you have described what you were going through in your journal at the time? And you may not have even thought of gender, right? So, but maybe you did. So
yeah, and I think at this point I was probably starting to think about this. Okay. This is there's boys and girls, and this is how they behave, and that part of my development had already happened. It was just the pain. I think a lot of it was realizing that there was a male puberty in front of me, and the thought of that was so horrifying to me. Mm-hmm. I remember just thinking in some ways I was okay just being who I was in that moment, just because I knew I wouldn't have to go through this puberty that I knew that was irreversible. But on the outside, I would often, I kind of formulated this character of this is good. This is something I want to do. And because that's what my brothers did. And that's how I wanted to mimic them, because that's how I fit in line. That's how I got love. That's how, we received the most healthy way is just showing up this way. So.
And you played sports. I mean, all the things that little boys did too. It was just, you fell in line right with your brothers. You enjoyed playing sports too, right?
Yeah.
So when you decided to talk to your parents, what did you say?
I remember talking to my parents and saying, I needed to talk about something with you that I'm going through. And they already knew I was going through something because I was suffering, right? So they always ask me what's wrong, and I just remember being horrified to try to describe to him what was wrong with me. And I remember my mom and dad came into our living room, and I probably took like the most roundabout way of trying to describe what I was experiencing, because I didn't want to be misunderstood, but I was also so scared that if I were to say what I really felt inside, that my love would be cut off. And I remember they would ask questions that would make me feel more comfortable. I don't remember exactly what those questions were, but I remember at one point they said, "Oh, okay, so are you gay?" And I said no. And it was actually kind of weird that they even asked me a question that had to do with who I was attracted to, if that makes any sense. So it's like, I'm like, why are they asking me? I'm like, at this point, I don't even know that I was even thinking about girls that much, you know? And I said, no, I think it has more to do with that I've always thought that I was supposed to be a girl. And I remember my mom said to me, she said, "Oh, you know, honey, that's fine. That's totally normal. You know, that people experience stuff like that. You know, that there's." And I thought, honestly, there was this relief where I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm not the only person."
Yeah.
So, and I do remember thinking that. Either everyone's faking it. They are all experiencing what I'm experiencing, or I'm the only person on this planet. So when my mom said that to me, I thought, "Oh, this is just a stage. Like, this is something I'm experiencing because that's just totally normal." And you know, my mom was probably trying to comfort me, right. But I recognize now that, you know, that wasn't probably the most, anyway, her telling me that made me feel like I couldn't, like, oh, okay, then there's nothing more to say, right? But then I think she said, you know, maybe your dad can give you a blessing to help you with this. And that's what really then solidified the silence I would have for many, many years to come. So
what happened?
So I remember my dad giving me a blessing. I remember thinking, like, this is my moment. This is how Heavenly Father is going to heal me, and I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to be given the strength that I can fix this. There's something, you know, wrong about me. And I remember him giving me a blessing and telling me that, you know, this would be my cross to bear, that this is something that I've been given as a challenge because I was so elect in the premortal life, that this is something that I was sent here to have, and that I could overcome this through the atonement of Jesus Christ. You know, that if I put my faith in the atonement, that there's nothing we can't overcome. And of course, those were familiar words to me, because that's something you hear all the time, right? Is that the atonement is there to help us to carry our burdens. So then you're thinking, okay, this is something I can overcome. But that only then lasted a while, you know? So I think like a week went by, and I remember going to my mom, and I was starting to feel really down again. And I said, you know, I'm just really struggling. And she says, well, do you think you need to talk to a therapist? And I said, yeah, I think that would be really good. So then I didn't hear anything. You know, she didn't say, well, here's your schedule when you're to go see a therapist. And time went by, and then I brought it up again. I said, well, do you think I should go see a therapist? And I think this is something that can help me. And she's like, yeah. Well, we'll see if we can get that figured out. I think after the 2 or 3 times, I kind of got the signal that, like, that I should just move on, get over it, and just hold that. That's a personal thing, you know. And you know, in hindsight, though, looking back, I'm actually really glad I didn't see a therapist, because learning what we've learned since then about, like, how they would have handled that, like,
because it might have been an LDS therapist. In
almost certainly.
Yeah.
What county? What, you know, like in St. George or rural St. George. Yeah. And they might have been someone the bishop preferred, and then it might have been someone who said, cling to Jesus, pray, and, you know, live the gospel. So how did you progress into your high school years? You did go through puberty, and the blessing and the atonement didn't, quote, fix you. How did you cope with these feelings inside and living in a very gender binary Mormon world?
And you said kind of in silence, right?
Yeah.
This idea of silence.
Yeah. At this point, it was like, don't bring this up. And the older I got, the more awkward it became, because I started to, you know, I'm going through a male puberty. So I'm distancing myself now from this comfort zone that I had once experienced. And as time went on, I just thought like, people think I'm ridiculous. They would never believe me, So here I am. I had a major growth spurt, I think in 7th grade, where I shot up. I'm 6 foot, 6'4", 3, just the avatar that people are experiencing of me was like evidence enough that I was crazy. You don't talk about this. This isn't something that is real, and then certainly not seeing anyone else, and at this time not seeing anyone who was queer. Like growing up, like I didn't think that was a thing that existed. Like in my, at least certainly not in my my neighborhood or anything like that. So I do remember what a big turning point for me that kind of sustained me, gave me some strength, is that I then started to develop an attraction to a girl that was in my band class. And I thought, oh my gosh, like my parents were right. Like this is something I can just fix and can go away, and not understanding that your sexuality, your attraction, and how you experience, your gender identity are two separate things,
So you're like, I'm attracted to girls, I must be okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And first,
which has nothing to do with gender.
Absolutely not.
Right,
and
yeah.
and it kills me, obviously today that's a big talking point. I'm walking evidence of that. Like there's people like me. The fact that we exist just shows you how complicated it really is. And but that was my entire reality. Absolutely. So those attractions made me think that, oh, this is something that can be overcome. But it wasn't. It was something that I thought about every day. And I remember thinking like, oh, if I were to kiss a girl, then it would go away, or that that something that there was always this carrot in front of me of something that would make it just go away. And at that point, it just really developed into shame. I'm just thinking like, oh my gosh, like I remember like having a bishop's interview as a younger kid and a kid in middle school, and thinking that through the spirit of discernment that this bishop would actually see this part of me. That if he looked me in the eye, so I would often break eye contact. Like I had a hard time looking at a bishop when he's giving me an interview, because I just thought, I'm a liar. Like there's something about me that I cannot figure out, and it's because I'm not good enough. So when you throw that on top of having what would then be my patriarchal blessing, that certainly made things a lot more complicated.
Should we talk about that next?
Sure.
Okay. We've talked about this quite a bit. So our non-Mormons, which is half our audience now, believe never Mormons, will probably know what patriarchal blessings are. But do you want to talk about when you got your patriarchal blessing, what you thought it was going to be, and then what it was?
Yeah. So my patriarchal blessing was, I see even my family, like my family really, really had a lot of emphasis on these blessings, coming from a family, youngest of 10 kids. Like I had already seen siblings get their patriarchal blessings, and different patriarchs, of course, different generations. My parents would often say how choice they thought our family was. Like we had this extra elect family. Of course, you come to find out everyone thinks that about their family, but that was like our reality. It's like my family was chosen, like this extra elect family. And some of the blessings I'd heard from my other siblings, like I had a brother, had a blessing that he would be one of the leaders in the War of Armageddon, to lead the saints through, as this protector, as this Captain Moroni figure. And my family would often just talk about that, how amazing, like, oh, so amazing. And I just would really harp on certain points. So there was a lot of buildup for me to get mine. I felt like this is something like, oh, like my parents are so proud of these other siblings and their blessings. So I should get my blessing now to figure out who I am.
Around what age?
12 years old.
Oh, it's young.
It is
Really
young.
young.
Yeah. Well, and looking back, I think there was a part of me that was excited, because I'm thinking like, this is what my family talks about on Sundays, like, our unique blessings. And you have to remember, like my family thought Jesus was coming like any day, just like every generation. But like they just really, like, we had food storage, we had all the things prepared. And so I'm thinking like, I would often hear, and it wasn't just from my family. I remember like in seminary and different places where it's like, are you going to live? Does that make you sad knowing that you might not even have kids on this planet? Like Jesus is going to come. And so I just remember thinking like, my life is going to be cut short, and Christ will come and everything will be fixed, because the world is so wicked. So seeing my siblings get their blessings built up a lot of anticipation for me. And at 12 years old, I remember being like, yeah, let's do this. I'll get my blessing. And do you want me to talk about some of the things? And then, yeah. So I got my blessing, and it was a long one. It was like, I think it's like 4 pages, 5 pages.
Wow.
And yeah, so I mean, I just by the length of it, you knew how, it's like, wow, this must be really important, right? No, so it started out with, of course, talking about what tribe you're from, and then very quickly went into like how unique and special it is that I would desire a blessing at such a young age, and how special, that made me, that I would want that. So I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like there's some big stuff he's going to say. And I talked a lot about the life that I would fulfill, like the typical stuff, serving a mission, getting married in the temple, and the type of person I need to marry. But there was a few things in it that really stood out to me early on, that I thought, like, it said, I need to start studying the scriptures right now in a way that I never have before. And I was one of those kids that probably had a little scrupulosity. Like I took everything very, very serious, very black and white. So I remember thinking like, I need to pray longer. I need to pray for an hour. I need to, because I'm expecting, these things that are talked about, my blessing to become a reality. Like that, one of the things that talked about was serving a mission, that when I got my blessing, that I would receive a confirmation that this place I'm going to, like, I would know like that this is where the Lord wanted me to go. It also talked about how I would see families that I baptized get married in the temple. And so I'm just expecting this to happen.
Did it make promises about your eventual leadership in the church kind of thing?
Yes. So of course, I think kind of the crowning point of this blessing is that I would sit in the highest councils of the church. Which
would mean to a Mormon boy or girl what?
You're thinking general authority, possibly in the quorum of the 12,
So basically an apostle or maybe even prophet.
Yes, absolutely. And my parents, upon hearing that, immediately jumped to the conclusion that like, oh my gosh, like you might be the prophet one day. It drives me crazy as I would often hear people say, like the video we posted talking about this, is a big comment we get is, that's so horrible for your parents to put that pressure on you. But I go, no, it's what was said in that blessing that really put the pressure on me.
It was them. It put the pressure on them, right, too.
Yes, yeah. I mean, of course, they were excited. And I'm thinking, like, I got to get my act together. Like, I got to figure out how to become this person. So it was one thing to be Mormon, right? It's one thing to be, like, an example, the light on the hill. But it was, like, another to be, like, you're not just a Mormon. You're like, one of the most important people on this planet. And I just remember like being jealous sometimes, looking at people going to Sunday school and thinking, I wish I could just be Mormon. Like, I wish I could goof around like some of my friends are in Sunday school right now. And of course I had those moments just being a kid, but there was always that part of me in the back of my mind going, stop. Like anything you say might be held against you one day. Like, so everything you do, everything how you judge others, like they're going to remember this. So one day if you're standing at that pulpit and you're giving a talk, like you better live a clean life, live your life in such a way, which my blessing would talk about, that I could have these blessings. And
those whole 6 pages were full. I just remember, after we got married, reading it and going like, wow, like this is nothing like my blessing. Mine was very basic. It even said things like God gave you a father's blessing before you came down to earth and stuff like this. It was, so just imagine this whole thing's loaded with like this, like, I've never heard of that before. What? And so it wasn't like there was a few odd statements in it. The whole thing was just very, I don't even know the word for it.
And as you're growing up, when you get your patriarchal blessing, you think it's kind of like Mormon fortune telling or Mormon tarot cards. Looking back, at least that's how I think about it. And but you don't realize that the patriarch is likely the main source of the volume or the words or the stories or the content or the commentary, the patriarch themselves. Because if you study the blessings given by a particular patriarch across multiple people, you'll see that he basically there's a lot that repeats between the blessings that patriarch gives. So it's not so much the differences between you or Heavenly Father's estimation of your value or worth. It's more just who you happen to get as your patriarch. But if you get that patriarch, but then again, maybe yours was different than your siblings, and so there were differences, and so that's going to add extra pressure, to you.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think my siblings also had some pretty big ideas, but mine seemed like maybe perhaps the most, exciting.
Did you have the same patriarch?
Yeah, some of them. I mean, I come from a big family, so there may have been like three different patriarchs. I had some older siblings that received a patriarch, and this is something I learned later in life, or received their patriarchal blessing, and had another one given to them because one of them made it sound like they're going to die young. And I had a sibling that went through a divorce, and the patriarchal blessing that she had received, as a youth, didn't align with how her life was supposed to go. So she went and got another one. Yeah, I had another sister.
If you don't like the patriarchal blessing you got, get another one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I
didn't know you could do that.
I didn't either. And I since heard that other people have done that as well. And having a sister receive her patriarchal blessing, where it made it sound like a different patriarch made it sound like that she wouldn't live very long, and that horrified her. And so she went and got another one. And I'm thinking, yeah.
What's interesting about this to me is if you kind of look at Mormon culture overall, you already have a bit of wearing specialness, right? And then what oftentimes accompanies the specialness, of course, is like super high expectations and a sense of pressure. And so I feel like you have that, I think, just being Mormon and growing up kind of in a fairly, let's just say, observing Mormon home. You have like the amped up version. So you've got an overlay then of extra specialness, particularly with the phrasing, a lot of the phrasing that's coming out from your patriarchal blessing. And so what I'm hearing is kind of now next level, you're experiencing next level pressure, next level expectations, and then a seriousness kind of comes over you in how you're kind of thinking about your decisions and your life. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's what's so hard about it, is because I was given it at such a young age. It was something that it's like my identity it's already formed just by being, Mormon, right? We know who we are, where we came from, where we're going. But then there's this expectation of this is not only who you are, but these are all the things you need to do to be you, to make it back. Mm-hmm. And I remember the most horrifying thought to me was and it still haunts me to this day, was that if I didn't fulfill this, or at some point in my life I'm old and I look back and I go, oh my gosh, it didn't happen, that I would let my entire family down. That was so unbearable to me to think about. Just the trauma that, just looking back, I go, no 12-year-old kid should be given a burden like that, where my mind is still formulating, trying to figure out what I want. And on top of that, gender dysphoria was just there wasn't a place in my world that I could make sense of this. It was just so hard. So,
and I was just gonna, maybe try and highlight that if you were struggling with your gender identity or your with gender dysphoria, and your parents were like, "What do we do with this kid?" Getting a blessing like this is like, "Oh, problem solved." Now you know that you got to strive to become a prophet. Your parents now know that they can just point you to your patriarchal blessing. Hey, you just got to hold on to the rod and follow the path, because we already know your destiny. And what that seems to do with many, I will say, LGBTQ Mormons is they become hyper religious. Mm-hmm. And you see these closeted gay Mormon young men that become APs on their mission, that become
hyper vigilant,
hyper righteous, mm-hmm. Kind of the Nephi type. But it's this cloak of perfectionism hiding deep distress and kind of closeted
it's like
emotion,
a feeling of brokenness too, like unworthiness,
suppressed identity, dysphoria, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Deep shame. Yeah. It was just the word that describes it all is that just shame. Mm. It's hard for me to look at that and go, how is this okay? How is this okay that we can tell, such a young mind or any member for that matter, you know, that this is your destiny. So that was something that was really, really hard on me looking back, and also played a pivotal part, of course, and the experiences I would have ahead of me. So
I so see that. I so see that. That would be so much to hold, particularly as just like a developing human being. Your brain's developing. You're trying to figure out who you are in a basic way. Yeah.
And the conflict of interest there is, of course, the church, and I've highlighted this before, in those patriarchal blessings, it's never, you're going to become a Catholic priest and serve your parish. You're
right.
You're going to become an atheist and a secular professor and change the world of higher education.
Or for women, you're going to be a leader,
a CEO of a Fortune 500 company as a woman. It's like, you're going to serve a mission. You're going to get married in the temple. You're going to pay your tithing. You're going to live the word of wisdom. You're going to serve in the church and have many children.
Yeah.
And there's a conflict of interest there, because if the church is the fortune teller and they're telling you what your life is going to be, and it happens to perfectly align with the church's best interests, then it's doubly problematic, because it's filling you full of shame and stunting your ability to explore. And it's self-serving for the church to tell everybody they're going to do exactly what the church wants them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Your whole identity at that point is tied into this organization. Your goodness is now tied into fulfilling this plan that's laid out for you. And that was certainly my lived experience.
Yeah. So how did high school end up playing out for you? Did you just suppress?
Yeah. I suppressed big time. It was like I had to, I would dissociate. It's the only way. Looking back, I would dissociate. And I remember people would often, you know, say, "Hey, Shaye, you there? Like, what's going on?" Like, I look like I'm off in deep thought, but like, it's like I got to this point where, in order to mask that pain and to separate that pain that I felt as a child, like I never wanted to feel that hurt and pain of thinking I don't want to live anymore. So it's like I developed a way of how I would separate that. And it was like there was two parts of me. There was the part that the experience, the character, the person that I played, people knew as Shaye, and what I liked. And, you know, in middle school, I had interest in doing X, Y, and Z. And I go, good, you know, people can see that. It's like that's what makes me, right? And to some degree, I think this is for everybody. But like, and then high school, it was like, oh, you know, Shaye, he plays the piano and he does this.
Brilliantly, by the way. Plays the piano beautifully.
So high school, one of your main focuses in high school was developing your musical talents?
I played the piano since I was a young kid, and it was actually a way I would dissociate. I didn't learn music or notes or anything like that, but I just would play and play. And I remember I'd play for hours. I'd play for hours because it was a way for me, music was a way for me to step outside of that pain. And so I would do that. But then by the time I got into high school, I developed, of course, a lot more and very much into the arts. I was in theater. That was something that was a great outlet for me. It kept me very busy. I would, memorize lines all the time.
Musical theater?
Yeah. I was in musical theater, and I had
Did you play any leads or any parts we would know?
I played this old man in Curious Savage. I was in middle school and came to see it.
Oh.
Made a very attractive, high schooler playing an old man. I do remember that vividly.
So I was in a lot of the musicals and those plays, but I
name a couple of musicals. I'm a musical.
We were
geek,
Peter Pan, Hello Dolly, How to Succeed in Business
Without really trying.
I'm trying to remember. Wait Until Dark. So just a lot of these plays. I didn't really play a lot of big roles. I had an older brother that was very talented in theater, and in many ways, like I felt like I was a late bloomer just because I didn't have. It's like I was always trying to figure out who I am. And I think, again, that's somewhat normal, but especially for me, I was like, what pattern do I follow to get love? What pattern do I follow to get acceptance? And so I think the reason I did musical theater was because of him. And so just by association of doing that, it gave me an identity, it gave me something to hold on to. And it was mostly a pretty positive experience for me, and just keeping myself busy. And that's something they talk about with people with gender dysphoria is one of the best mechanisms is just staying busy, working on something, working towards something. And so those are some of the easier parts of my life when I look back. So.
And then really quickly, what was your faith like in high school? Your Mormon faith?
I was called into the seminary council, and I remember thinking of that as like, this is God's way of saying you're on the right path. By revelation, I was called to be on this council. It was comforting to me to know that like I was doing something right in that moment. And that's how I knew like, okay, I must not be a complete disappointment, or, in fact, I'm still experiencing gender incongruence. God loves me enough that he would call me on the seminary council, but I don't know.
Which is kind of prestigious for a Mormon high school kid, right?
Oh yeah. It was like, that's where, the perception was that these were the good kids, right? These are the ones that were living their life as we should. So
did you like ever in high school try and ask God if the church were true, or to gain your own testimony, or did you just kind of, it was the water you swam in?
It was the water I swam in for sure. I don't recall like, I don't think I ever like prayed and had this amazing, powerful experience in that part of my life. But it was my reality. It was true. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Village, or, and that movie's so profound
Classic,
to me.
yeah.
Oh, so profound. But
especially for people in faith crisis.
yeah, but when you're raised in, St. George, Utah, and you just think like, this is where safety is, and this is true. And if you're not part of this, you're kind of weird, and so it's like the mixture of religion and faith were so meshed together. Like, it was just like, I didn't feel uncomfortable being in high school, bearing my testimony or saying something that would otherwise seem like this is the place to talk about this. Everyone was Mormon, right? So
maybe let's just quickly touch on your mission if you want. Is there any other life experience you want to share before kind of briefly touching on your mission, either in your family or in your life? Any stories you want to make sure you get out there in the timeline?
Probably covers most of it. So.
Did you date?
Yeah. I did. I only dated, I think I only had like one girlfriend that I had for a period of time. That was my junior year. And then my senior year, I was just having fun.
How was your mission? Ohio, right?
Yeah. Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay. Yeah.
So Cincinnati, Ohio, I remember filling out my paperwork, and my mom didn't want me to go foreign. So she put like, that I didn't want to learn a language, and in some ways I just didn't care where I went. I was just like, I just remember being just so like overcome with like, oh my gosh, like I'd seen my older siblings go, and come back with these powerful testimonies. And I remember thinking like, I better have these experiences or I'm going to fail. Right. So every step, every decision I made was so tightly wound in fulfilling this patriarchal blessing that I had been given.
And so how was your mission overall?
It was.
And are there important stories that you want to tell from your mission that were an important part of your Mormon story?
Yeah. So my part of the pressure that came from my mission is what my patriarchal blessing said about my mission. One of them was that I would receive a witness that where I'm going, that the Spirit would confirm to me that this is where the Lord wanted me to go. And so, of course, there's a lot of anticipation with that, getting my calling. And then not feeling that way was kind of a shock.
Oh, you didn't get the witness?
I didn't. I just felt kind of numb. I just thought, okay, this is where I'm going. More nervous than anything. The second part was talking about how on my mission that I would see people get married in the temple to be sealed, for time and all eternity. And that I just remembered the pressure of that was so scary to me, that I would be serving a mission where I have to go find these people who will be sealed because they were prepared before I came to this earth, that I would teach them the gospel, right? And so from day one, serving my mission, everything was about like, who are these people? I got to find them. And I think that was another thing that was really hard for me, is because I can't think of anything in my life that I put as much effort into as my mission. I remember getting physically sick, like getting ulcers and still working. Like that, I felt guilty to say I'm sick. Like I remember the first time I had the flu on my mission, and they're like, well, you should probably sleep in. And I couldn't do it because I thought if I slept in that according to the handbook that, I won't be blessed. Everything's very like law of Moses out there. Right. And so I had a trainer that was very much black and white. And so he kind of set this theme for me where, I remember going out there and in the handbook, it says, I think you have to be in bed by 10 or 10:30. I can't remember. but it says you have to be in bed. So if it was 10:30, I don't know if you recall the time you go to bed, but we'll say it's 10:30.
Yeah, it's 10:30.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I remember he'd make us pray on top of the bed because it says you have to be in bed. So we get on our knees and pray on top of the bed. And I just thought, this is what missions are like. You know, I thought this is how it's supposed to be. And of course, the mission field or the MTC before that, like hearing about all these miracles we'll see and angels will be around about it. I literally thought I would be having these experiences where I would see this. Like that's the world I lived in. That's how my parents talked. That's how, to some degree, some of my siblings talked. And so for me, it was like when those things started not to happen, it was kind of hard. So generally speaking, a lot of the prophecies made in your patriarchal blessing weren't coming true for you on your mission. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I never. For one, there wasn't a temple in my mission. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to see anyone get sealed. So I thought it must be after my mission. But then everyone that I baptized, which was just a small handful of people, either fell away or, you know, I don't know. Like I know for sure none of them stayed in the church. So.
And how does it more, if God's giving these patriarchal blessings and God is all powerful and all knowing, if a patriarchal blessing doesn't, if promises in a patriarchal blessing or prophecies start not coming true, how does a Mormon reconcile or justify that?
It's always your fault.
How so?
Because if you weren't worthy, or we have our agency. That's what we often hear. It's like, well, everyone has their agency. That's another way of saying you must have messed up. And so for that first pillar not to happen for me was like catastrophic. And I thought, I just remember thinking like, this isn't happening because I have gender dysphoria. And of course I didn't think gender dysphoria, I didn't know what that was. I had this part of me that I knew there was something that wasn't in alignment with how the world experiences their world, right? So everything went back to that for me, that this pivotal thing that's been part of my life every day that I can remember, I thought about that, so.
And when it's tied to like other people's conversion to the church and eternal salvation, that just it's a whole nother level. Because it's one thing if you're not righteous enough and it affects your future, but if your lack of righteousness or lack of perceived righteousness is preventing people from converting to the church and getting married in the temple and having their celestial family, well, then you're not just wrecking your life through unfaithfulness. You're actually wrecking other people's lives. Am I overstating that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many quotes where it's like, these people prepared for you. And if you're not living worthy, or if you're not knocking doors, or you're not being led by the Spirit, most importantly, that these people may not receive the gospel because of you, which in hindsight, I don't know how that makes sense in agency, but it's like, I looked at that and just thought like, it's all on me. Everything rested on me and what I say and how I bore my testimony. And what I remember just like anytime I knock on a door, I thought like this person was prepared to meet me, and what I say can make the difference of them, you know, feeling the Spirit. And I think, well, did I do my morning studies this morning? Is that why today was bad? Or is it because I didn't get along with my companion today? We didn't have the Spirit with us, or, you know, so.
And you became AP on your mission, right? So, I mean, or did I read that wrong?
No, I was made a zone leader.
Okay.
So I
That's
thought
still pretty validating.
Yeah.
I was his own leader. I felt good about that.
Yeah. I was made a zone leader pretty early on. So I thought like, okay, you know,
You might be AP.
Yeah, it crossed my mind. I mean, it's so funny because there's this silent like feeling. I feel like a mission field is where everyone's thinking about. We don't aspire to things, and it's not that I did. I just thought like you're wondering, is that going to happen to me, and how does that play into like, you know?
I mean, if you're going to be prophet someday, surely you'll be AP on your mission, right?
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And that's one thing that's funny about our cultures. I feel like we talk about callings like, you know, accepting them with humility, but to some degree, there's so much. I think especially in the mission field, there's a lot of aspiring, I feel like, where people wanted.
For sure.
Yeah.
But we have to act like we don't want it.
Yes.
Tell ourselves we don't want it.
Yes.
But then we wonder what happened when we didn't get it. Or we did get it and we think we're awesome, extra awesome because we got it.
Right. Yeah, totally. It was that for me for sure. But.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to say about your mission in terms of how it impacted your journey?
Yeah. You know, for the most part, it was I want to say a hugely growing experience for me. Just to be in a place where not calling home, not talking to mom and dad, and just focusing on what I was doing was really good for me. I do remember having spiritual experiences out there that of course frame a little bit differently now that were really profound, you know, and I remember praying and feeling God's love and feeling like I was on the right path, or situations where I run into someone on the street saying, you know, I felt like you were led to me because I was feeling suicidal, or things like that, where I just thought like, wow, I must be really in alignment with the will of God. So things like that were pretty impactful, you know, and I don't look at experiences like that like, oh, I just made it all up. I don't know, you know, but I do cherish those experiences, but I don't frame them certainly in the way that I did at the time. So
in your mind and in your relationship with your Heavenly Father, like many of our, let's just say, gay or lesbian brothers and sisters, did you have some sort of hope or understanding with Heavenly Father that if you served that super faithful mission, he would take the gender dysphoria away from you?
Oh, no question. Wow. No question. In fact, I remember feeling like it has to happen. It has to happen now. Like, you know, there's no better place I could be in the world than be serving a mission. And that if I worked with faith, I could overcome this.
When you got back, were you like, am I fixed? Maybe I'm fixed. Did you process that at all?
I think I developed this like pseudo mission personality. Like I remember coming back and people being like, who are you? Being so proud of like what I just done out there that I really pushed it in the back. Looking back, it's amazing that I did this. Like I just go, how did I cope? But it's like I always had this thorn in the back of me that I was able to just kind of push away. So came back feeling like I was on the right path. So
this is a really delicate thing to talk about, but let's just say in high demand religions, part of the whole goal is to replace your authentic self with the self that the organization wants you to identify with. And so it's about suppressing who you are. Like missions, some would say missions can be, I don't want to use the C word. So missions can be the most identity erasing part of the Mormon experience. And some say the Mormon Church's missionary program is more for the missionaries than it is for the converts. But I guess, you know, would you agree that that your mission was sort of the church creating the identity that it wanted for you versus the identity that you wanted for yourself?
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's the whole experience of serving a mission, I think is, for the most part, really is for the missionary to be deeply converted, right? It's to gain your own testimony and your foundation of how you're going to live your life and you know, raise your own kids and have them do the same thing all over again. So yeah, for sure.
For a believer, it's developing your faithfulness. For someone maybe who doesn't believe anymore, it's kind of programming, in a sense, programming you to be the person the church wants you to be versus your authentic self.
And conditioning you.
Conditioning, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. So much on the mission, at least with my mission president, was talked about what you do. He's like, you think this is hard now, wait until you get home. You know, so then you're thinking, okay, what I'm experiencing right now is what it is and what it should be. And now I have to go back to the world, the lost world, right. And how tragic that is, you know. And I do remember coming home and my parents were watching TV and I thought, what are you doing? Like, why would you,
this is not the optimal way to spend time.
And I turned on the first Vision, this DVD we had, and I made them watch it. My mom's kind of like, okay, honey, calm down, you're home now. And, you know, and I just remember thinking like, if this is the most important thing in the world, what are you doing? This is the most important thing. Everyone should be out sharing this message. And I remember coming home and thinking, like, I had a brother that wasn't active, and I just remember just like crying and thinking, like, oh my gosh, that's so sad. Like, never dawning on me that maybe he was happy. You know, like I just assumed that he must be miserable because I just went out and shared the most important message that this world could ever receive. So it's interesting.
I do think it's interesting in the sadness because there's that where you're projecting misery or sadness on the person, but there's also just the sadness of what that means in Mormonism. And what that means is separation. What that means is like, oh, I may not be with my brother in the afterlife too.
Well,
and that
is really sad.
He's
He's going to create an empty chair for our family in the celestial kingdom.
That's the black and white world you're coming from. Like, I'm thinking I'm trying to save souls, but yet my own family, I have siblings who are not active. And I'm thinking, what are we doing? This is my family. Like, and I think a lot of people go through that. They go through this phase of like, why isn't grandpa active or whatever? You go through all these when you get home from your mission thinking like, I got to save my own family.
Right.
And then life hits you and you move on. So.
Did you ever have you ever seen the Book of Mormon musical, or is that too edgy for where you are?
Not yet. I mean, we certainly would now.
Yeah, it's not too edgy, but
I've heard some of the music though.
So there's I've mentioned this in Mormon stories before, but there's this character, Elder Price, who's like the perfect ideal Mormon missionary, and he's got this song where he basically says, "I'm going to be the Mormon who changes all mankind." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of like Orthodox Mormonism plus a mission just makes you feel like literally you're the modern version of the Messiah to save the world.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you had this missionary pseudo personality that's just like, this is what you do. This is how you show up. And this is, I don't know. And you think, how could anyone ever go back?
Yeah.
I remember thinking my life will never be the same. I will get up every morning at 6:30, do my morning studies. And because it's such a part of your routine and how you've been, inoculated to do. So it's been interesting.
Well, Shaye, it's been wonderful hearing your early Mormon story. And Amanda, you've been sitting there very patiently, and your story is just as important and just as powerful. So is it all right if we switch to Amanda's story?
Let's do it.
Is that all right?
Okay.
Yeah, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, Amanda, where does your Mormon story begin?
Okay. Also in St. George. And I had such a good childhood. But I think if I were to put it into a phrase, it's the whole where much is given, much is expected. And my parents were amazing because they both came from divorced families. They both came from challenging circumstances. And I feel like they were just putting in, I look at how hands-on they were as parents, how much they were sculpting this life for us. They're both highly educated. And my mom was one of those moms where we had art time and we had learning time, and we didn't just celebrate Christmas. We celebrated Passover in maybe somewhat cringy ways looking back now, but we were learning about different cultures. She was just one of those moms that put forth so much work. And my dad too. My dad was very hands-on. And I'm the oldest in my family. And I think I just have to take full responsibility for how I perceived Mormon culture. I don't want to act like I was a victim to it because there's so many different personalities. I look at my siblings, for example, and I feel like the same, maybe the birth order has something to do with it, but there's this pressure, right? And my response to that pressure was feeling like, oh my gosh, it is my job to please people. It is my job.
Marty's nodding.
Yeah.
100% my job. And if people are not pleased, I don't know. I just had this low key anxiety my entire life. If someone was upset with me, you have to fix that situation as quickly as possible. And
how many kids and where are you in the birth order?
So 5 kids, and I'm the oldest.
Okay, oldest of 5.
Oldest of 5, yes. And so I also loved music from a young age. And so my feeling was, okay, this is my contribution. As a Mormon, we all have something to contribute. And I just felt like if I can perform and share my gifts and talents, this will bless people. It will make my family proud. But I was also the type that if I didn't get the roles that I wanted, if I wasn't the best, then I felt like a really big disappointment. And I think that was pressure I put more on myself really than anyone else was necessarily putting on me.
What, so you were raised in St. George. What careers or professions did your dad and or mom have? Just to kind of give us a sense for maybe how sometimes personalities and professions impact the temperament or the feeling in the home.
Yeah. So my dad is an optometrist, and my mom always worked in higher ed, in education, elementary education.
So was she a working mom?
She was,
Oh.
yes. And but I don't know how she did it because she was one of those working moms that we like didn't know she worked. Yes, my dad would watch us one night a week when I was, going through elementary school, and she never missed anything. Like, she was involved in PTA. She did all the things. And at the time I just thought, this is what moms do, right? Moms do all the things. Wow. And as a mom now, I'm like, how did she do all that? But
yeah, they call that second shift in the social science biz, where you're the mom, you're the wife, with all that entails, and you've got a job. And usually the husband doesn't pick up even though both are working, it's rare that the husband picks up all the duties. So it's an extra burden that your mom with 5 kids was probably carrying.
Yeah. And she loved it. I feel like it was a passion project for her. She later, when I was older, got her doctorate and has worked full time since then. So she just kind of did that. What do they call that? Second act type of thing. But anyway, that was a great example to me because education was really important to my parents. But at the same time, I felt the academic pressure of, perform and make sure, you got to be the best. But we also were really free range. Back in the day in St. George, we would just go down to the Virgin River and just play. And just a really imaginative kid. I loved to write stories. And so even though I felt a lot of expectations, given a lot of room just to express myself.
How did Mormonism sort of inform your family culture? How Mormon was your family?
My family was pretty Mormon. I mean, we were the family that would have the 7 a.m. devotional. And I think...
What's that?
Oh, okay, yes. So we would wake up, say a prayer, sing a song, read from the scriptures. And I don't want to say that we did that always, but it was more on than off. And I think there was just urgency because of the families my parents came from. Particularly my mom came from a less active family, ended up in her early marriage activating all of her siblings. And there was this sense of this stuff matters. Like, my mom would do object lessons where we would pack imaginary hand cards and try to imagine what it was like being pioneers, very creative stuff, I feel like. So yeah, I feel like very mainstream. My extended family was more diverse, and that was great. I had 2 uncles. They were kind of like uncles by marriage in my mom's family who were gay. And they were involved and invited to family events. And so, this is early 90s.
Wow.
And it was, I don't want to say there wasn't homophobia there. There was. But they were invited in, and I had these people in my life from childhood where I looked at these people and thought, okay, I know there's something different, or maybe a little bit of love the sin or hate the sin type of thing going on. But I had a point of reference. So when people would talk about, the gays or whatever, I would think, well, that's just like my uncle. They're normal people. They're nice people. They're not all the same. I had these 2 uncles that were very different from each other, not brothers. So they were both step siblings on different sides of my mom's family. So our family works differently in that way. I had an aunt on my dad's side, convert from Mormonism to Orthodox Judaism when I was a child. Yeah.
Living where?
So it started at the BYU Jerusalem Center, and she kind of moved around after that. But I just had exposure to all these ideas as a kid. So I think in a lot of ways, though we were very mainstream Mormons, there was a focus on multiculturalism and things like that. And so, but in all the other ways, very, very Orthodox, church every Sunday. When we were on vacation, we'd go to church. Never go to the store. Maybe if someone needed medicine on Sunday. Yeah. So I think I'm trying to think of other
swearing,
specific things.
R-rated movies.
No R-rated
coffee,
movies.
tea,
Coffee. No
alcohol.
No caffeine at all. And maybe my dad would have caffeine if we were going on a long, drive, but not coffee or tea, So I can't think of any way we didn't fall in line with the requirements to enter into the temple. All that was fully expected. Yeah.
And do you think of your Mormon childhood as being happy?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. lots of good memories. And I think if there is a thorn in that, it was just the constant, I just like a low key anxiety my whole life of, if I don't show up well, or if I don't make people comfortable and happy, I'm not safe, and I can't get love that way if I don't do that. And also developing, I think, the personality very associated with my achievement, right? If I didn't achieve, who was I? And so it was a positive experience at the time, and I look back and just see a lot of pressure that I put on myself.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a little bit more about the people pleasing? I just think it's so relatable. Is there a time that you kind of recognize in yourself the people? Because I view people pleasing, it's conditioned for sure. Like I feel like it comes from everywhere. I feel like we have it culturally, religiously, oftentimes, and familially, but I'm just curious if you, in your story or looking back, you really see that emerge in a way, though, of coping. And what I mean by coping is just oftentimes people pleasing is a way to feel love. So it's a way we get our needs met, and we do that however we can when we're growing up. It's not like we choose. We are just we do it the way. So needs met, or it can be around safety, because people pleasing very much can oftentimes ensure safety of our environment. If it's sort of like, I notice volatility, or I notice kind of unpleasant dynamics, but if I show up in a certain way, I can assuage that, right? And then kind of lastly, I feel like it really falls into this conditioning, the people pleasing kind of part and feeling of, we're responsible for other people. We're responsible for how they experience this life, the world. Sometimes it's their salvation, like you were saying on the mission, and it's so deeply insidious. And I think it follows people even past transition. It's kind of one of those things that sticks and stays. But what of those things resonates with you, if any, about people pleasing? And is there a part in your story where you're like, I really remember it kind of really emerging here and then just kind of following me throughout? Does that make sense?
Yes. I felt like I was just a fish always swimming in that water. And so I don't know if the chicken or egg came first, but I always had this mental awareness that if I acted a certain way, it could affect others' moods. So there wasn't any sense of unsafety. I mean, like parents have tempers, as a parent now, I'm like, oh yes. So if someone was upset with me, I've always been very sensitive, and I guess the word sometimes is used as empathic. And what's interesting is I always heard those framed in such positive ways. Like if you're an empath, that means you are deeply engaged with others' emotions, which is a positive. But it was also, I feel like it's kind of, I don't know if I want to say trauma response or not, but it was like I was so aware of others' moods. I mean, I still am. I feel like I can tell if someone is depressed or upset. And I didn't have differentiation to be able to say, that person is feeling that. Instead, I could feel how they felt, or that was my perception at least. And so I felt like it was my job to fix that. And I think in Mormonism, Mormon families, Mormon social structures in general, we have an enmeshment that can be gorgeous. It can be so beautiful. And when you're in a time of need and people are just like, it's everybody's job to help, that's beautiful. But there's also this thing where you belong to everyone.
Exactly.
And not yourself. And you can't say, hey, so-and-so is having a bad day. It was my problem.
Right.
And so I can only take responsibility for that is how I chose to show up in those situations. And then, so to childhood, it was just kind of mildly that way. I would say going into social settings and dating, that was rough because I felt like the stakes got higher. And, when you're kind of coming of age, just anything that showed up as a failure as well kind of ties into that. Yeah. I wanted people to see me a certain way, like I think most people do in our ego, right? As successful or beautiful or talented, right? And so when things didn't align with that, it was like, self-destruct. I didn't know how to move on. So yeah, it was achievement and people pleasing kind of sandwiched together.
Absolutely. So relatable. And it makes sense too, I think, playing out that what you see particularly, I'll say with, women, is that there is this sense of confusion around who they are. And you see that because the pattern is that you're looking outside yourself always. You're kind of caretaking or connecting or, really taking the pulse on what other people feel and it takes you away from yourself to do that. Does that make sense? As opposed to like you having an experience and you're like, this is my experience and I'm here and I can perceive what other people are feeling, but I'm here too. Oftentimes what I've heard from a lot of women and what I've myself experienced, and I'm curious if you would relate to this too or say this, is this idea of leaving ourselves to take care of. It's like I feel other people's emotions so strongly. I don't even know what I feel in this moment. I am taken over by this feeling of responsibility of restoring peace and having everyone feel valued and having everyone feel, right? Does that make sense?
Yes. And I would say I couldn't at the time have realized how much my sense of identity was around, it's like this weird mirror thing, right? Where you perceive how other people perceive you and it goes back and forth. And there's very little like heart-centered stopping and listening. Okay, how does this make me feel? What is it that I want? And maybe that's just like typical adolescence in a lot of ways, but I do feel like Mormonism fueled that. And going into my teen years as well, I was constantly aware of my body. I feel like this is very, very common, just probably almost universal for women. But the teachings of modesty in the church, a lot of those things, I was always aware. It wasn't just, what I would do, but how I would look and how that could affect other people.
What were some of the teachings around body that you absorbed? Behaviors, teachings, for those who don't really know what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I think a lot of emphasis on thinness, on even particular like presentation and style. The idea was, you want to be classy, you want to be classic, you want to be, and certainly modesty, right? Modesty was huge.
Which meant what?
Just the idea, my understanding of modesty was, women are divine, all this, but there's something very dangerous. You are a weapon. You need to cover up your body because it is dangerous. And I would say, I don't know if I can point to one thing. I do remember a seminary teacher years later saying, giving this impression that it was really women's job in marriage, for example, to put out, depending on what the partner needed. It was this idea that your sexuality is, there's some quote about men would be, that men would be reluctant to assume family responsibilities if it weren't for sex, right? So these ideas were all just kind of, hitting me at different angles. But in a nutshell, my body was an object. It was sacred and special, but it was a weapon if it was ever exposed to the wrong way. And so the idea of like, I grew up with the most amazing girls. We had so much fun in all the Mormon rites of passage. And I remember a lot of them were more relaxed. Like they would wear a sleeveless dress to prom. But I felt like, honestly, like if I showed this part of my body, my shoulder, that it might cause, one of these these boys about to go on a mission to have a bad thought. And what if I was the one that made it so they couldn't serve a mission, and all these ideas. And certainly alongside that, sexual purity, that wasn't even like on my radar because I was so far away from that line.
But you mentioned it. So how did it factor in the teachings around sexual purity or the fear around sexual purity or the importance of sexual purity? Explain that to those who don't know what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I felt like it was women were the virtuous ones that were supposed to keep things in line, and I honestly thought that men were like werewolves and that if you made yourself vulnerable, they honestly would like attack. Like that it was so easy to seduce a man, like by, exposing part of your body or saying something that was too flirtatious or whatever, that it was dangerous. And of course that wasn't my experience of the boys I grew up with either. But I thought, well, if you say you do the wrong thing, who knows what will happen.
Right.
So
so it can actually reinforce that your modesty's working then, because you're like, oh, they can't control themselves. And so if you're having a good experience with the boys around you, you're like, well, that's because I'm modest and I'm saying the right things and I'm doing all the right things. But once if you take a step to the right and no control, who knows where you'll end up.
And I had this group of safety. Again, some of these girls I grew up with were still really close. But it was sort of like, the other kids in the class, and we'd hear these stories and I'd be like, ooh, it's a good thing that, we're these good girls. And I don't know. So I'm talking about like the negatives, but then there was also my experience growing up in the church was all these moments of just like spiritual highs. I remember going to EFY and, everyone's singing the EFY medley. The girls are singing Sisters in Zion and the boys are singing the Armies of Helaman. It's just this like euphoric, like, yes, this is the center of the universe right here. And we are going to bring the world its truth. And I had these moments of my like Mormon exceptionalism, I want to say, and achievement were reinforced in key moments where, okay, I'm doing it right. And I'm in line with how I'm supposed to show up and how I'm supposed to behave. So yeah, I'm kind of all over the place with
That's
that, but
beautiful.
hopefully it's making sense.
So important to highlight.
Yeah. Okay. So, this is perfect. This is beautiful. So I was just having a reflection, with you, Shaye, we talked about identity. And now, Amanda, we're talking about identity with you. For you, Shaye, it was sort of be a man, be masculine, be a righteous priesthood holder, become a prophet someday, be a leader in the church. And with you, Amanda, it's please people, look out for other people's needs, and be attentive, and make other people happy, maybe at the expense of your own happiness a little bit, and be pure and
be attractive.
Sort of be attractive, right? Like. What you two are bringing to me is this realization, this distillation of realization that over millennia we've developed in tribes, we've developed in social groups, and tribes and social groups are important because they protect us, they feed us, it's where our families and our children can grow, it's where we can get support, and it's the civilization that can allow us to thrive when other civilizations might want to destroy us. You know what I mean? So like identity formation is going to happen in a tribe, and it's important that every tribe member kind of learn and play its role because that's how the tribe thrives. So on the one hand, identity formation is always going to happen in a social context, and it's good for all of us to some degree that the tribe does well, because generally speaking, if the tribe does well by everyone playing their role, then the individuals tend to do better than if the tribe falls apart. So there's something about each of you becoming what Mormonism needed you to become. There's something about that being a good thing because collectively it's good for all of us. But what I'm also noticing is that comes at a cost, because you become who the tribe wants you to become, but you do that often at the expense of authenticity, of self-knowledge, of self-development. And I think what we're going to find out is for both of you, not just you, Shaye, but for you, Amanda, too, that becoming who the tribe needed you to become comes at a price of not self-knowledge, not self-development, and maybe of self-sacrifice in ways that ends up being harmful later. Is that true?
Yes. Yes, I would say so. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And it's cringy for me. It's cringy looking back, but like to just say it as honestly as I can. I felt like people are telling me, "You've got talent, kid," and the message was, "You have talent to bless other people, not to impress them." So I was like, "Okay, yes, bless, not impress." But then everything I saw modeled around me was, I'm an important person because I have this talent. I have this thing to offer Mormonism. So I could see modeled whether it was always in the performing arts because that's just what I was interested in. But it was look at this, singer-songwriter or whoever who happens to be Mormon, and they are sharing the gospel, through this roundabout way. And what saddens me now looking back on that was not just the pressure of that situation, but the joy of creation is bound up by, what other people are perceiving, what your role is, and achievement. Are you good at this? Well, you should only sing that song if people are applauding you. I don't think this is just a Mormon experience at all, by the way, but I think, I think maybe something in that is really, really played up.
Yeah, I agree.
So what was your talk about your pursuits, your talents, and the ways that you pursued the performing arts as a way to glorify the church and the gospel? So did you start singing at a young age? Were you playing musical instruments? Did you get into theater? Like, what was your path?
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's fairly typical for Utah Mormons, but yeah, I started singing when I was young in church, musical theater. Some of the plays I was in. There's this musical called "So This Is Dixie."
Ooh.
And
I mean, you're in Dixie, right? Dixie, Utah.
Yes, and it was about the founding of St. George, the settling of St. George, which I don't know. I resist all those terms now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The colonization of St. George, let's say that. The South Paiute tribe was there long, long before. But looking back, actually preparing for this video we were making, we were going through all this old footage, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is the most Mormon entertainment in the world. Dancing and singing Polygamous Wives of Erastus. Anyway, so that was one of them. Another play was by the same creators of Saturday's Warrior. They made a Nephite musical called A Day, a Night, and a Day. And it's about, of course, the day, night, and a day of darkness, right? Waiting for the sun to rise in the Book of Mormon. And all the songs are about, are from the Book of Mormon. And it was I just felt like so amazing to be a part of this. And this was like in elementary school. And then when I was a young teen, I realized that I loved writing songs. And it was usually about boys that I liked. And then I would get attention for it. And
sounds like Taylor Swift, basically.
Yeah, let's not compare me to Taylor Swift. That would be a very unfair comparison. But similar. Yeah. I felt like it made me special. And so I kept doing it. And
so you became a singer-songwriter a little bit?
Yeah, dabbled in that. And even different church things. I remember I wrote like seminary theme songs for there was I think it was Logan High School Seminary. I wrote a very bad, looking back, not so great song based on their theme that year.
How did they find out about you?
I think it was my uncle taught seminary up there. And so, yeah, it was some, Mormon word of mouth or whatever.
The Mormon web.
Well, Mormon web before.
But that's pretty cool. You're living in southern Utah writing a song for a high school in northern Utah.
I guess a high school student, right? Being in this very small pond type of mentality. And then, let me think. So then I met Shaye, and when Shaye was on his mission, and should we get into that? Let me talk about the music real quick, and then we'll talk about the other stuff. But while Shaye was on his mission, I released an album that was sold to Deseret Book. It was called Letters. It's not available now. It was small, but in my mind at the time, right, I was like, I'm going to go to BYU. I'm going to study songwriting, and I'm going to be like, the Vanessa Carlton of Mormonism. And I just was so identified with that. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was my contribution. My contribution, be talented, be humble. It sounds so cringy to say out loud, but
is your album on Spotify now?
No.
You don't want it to,
goodness, no.
You don't want I want to look it up right now.
It's not. It's nowhere. It's scrubbed.
It's on CD.
What was it called?
No, it's not.
What was the album called?
Letters.
Okay. I promise you can't find it anywhere.
It's not sounding
I'll
like
send it
she
to
wants
John.
us to
I'll
find
find
it.
it. I'll find it.
You can use it before every podcast.
Oh gosh. Anyway, but I remember we had like a multi-stake thing for, I think it would have been Joseph Smith's 100th birthday or something like that, because it would have been like 2005. Yeah, that's probably what it was. But I wrote this song about Emma Smith, and how I felt like she was misunderstood. And so it was a useful way to express my feelings, and kind of, you know, sweet, I guess, looking back at some of the songs I wrote about Shaye. But yeah, that just the way the exceptionalism can make you perceive yourself as such a big deal. And then I went to BYU and took a songwriting 101 class, and everybody was amazing. It was literally like the baseline class. And I thought going into that, like, oh, this is, you know, and everybody was super talented. Like it's just prolific, I think, in Mormon culture. But that's something is cringy, I guess, looking back, is I could have just enjoyed being creative, but I was really interested in being somebody special and contributing, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway.
That distinction, I think, is so important, because it does play out that perfectionism. And perfectionism is always like hustling for the end. It's always like end product oriented. And the process is like enjoying the process really is not the point, as opposed to like a love. Like I enjoy it. I love doing it. Is oftentimes lost. So I love that you make that distinction. And oftentimes you can't tell just by looking at someone. Are they loving it and enjoying it, or are they really hustling? But you see it oftentimes come to a head for a lot of teens. You know, they started soccer when they were 3 and they're done by the time they're 15, never want to play soccer again. Or do you know what I mean? And you can see what's lost. It's like, oh, the love like was taken over by this idea of perfectionism or hustling.
Yeah.
Performance.
Yeah.
Performance. Yeah.
Performance equals worth, basically.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
How was your faith during your high school years, your Mormon faith, your testimony? Was it there? What was it rooted in?
It was strong for sure. I had an interesting experience when I was in middle school. I had a friend who was evangelical, and, you know, she brought forth to me all the anti-Mormon lies, quote unquote. And I was just like stunned. It was like somebody, you know, hit me across the face with a 2x4 or something. And I loved this girl. She was my, you know, someone I trusted. And I was just shocked, like all of a sudden, you know, why are all this stuff can't be true, you know, rocking the hat, polygamy, just kind of your run of the mill stuff. But this young evangelical girl living in St. George, Utah, knew this stuff.
Around what year? Around?
This would have been, let's say 2002, 2001.
You graduated high school what year?
2005.
Okay. So somewhere in that early 2000s period.
Yeah. And I remember her kind of confronting me. I went to a class after that. My teacher in that class was LDS, told me, you know, I'm crying. I'm like, I don't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. I just tried to bear my testimony. I've never heard of this stuff. I don't know. Ugh. Like I was so just like stressed out about it. And went and talked to my seminary teacher. And of course they told me these are just their tactics. These evangelical people, you know, they want to tear down our faith. They want you to be confused. And of course I being in the world I lived in, believed that, okay, that's, you know, I love this girl, but she must just, her poor church is just really confused about us. I remember going to my dad and asking him for a father's blessing, that I would be able to share the gospel with my friend. I remember sending the missionaries to her, and she accepted, which I'm sure was like a Bible bash session. I never heard of what happened with that. But yeah, I felt the Spirit. I remember my parents taking us to the Sacred Grove, praying in Sacred Grove. I regularly felt peace, through music at church, right? Oh, like all the euphoric feelings of peace and joy. So that was just, you know, proof to me that this was real. And then my family members who were different, I felt like I was able to love them, but I also really feared the world and feared people who were different. So yeah, I think my faith was really strong, and just being in a group of kids where everybody believes what you do and you love each other and care for each other. It was very safe, right? It was very, I felt belonging. So all that was very real. And I look back and I still feel like that was very real. I might frame it differently now, but, lots of good feelings growing up as a teen in the church.
If we were to sort of meet you as a teen and ask you, what you expected from your life or what you were hoping for, what do you think your teen self would have said? Like, this is what I want for my life. This is what I'm hoping for.
Kind of depends on the year, but performing would have been part of that, because that was definitely like a big part of my identity. But
You wanted to become what? Like a performer? Like
it was sort of like
Marie Osmond or Mindy Gledhill or what?
I think I thought that would be fun up until I got married and had kids. So it was never, my purpose was definitely to be a mom. Like, I knew that don't let anything else distract you in this world. Being a mom is what matters, And so that would have definitely fed into that. And I think my other ambitions, would have been around trying to fit that. It's like that analogy where you put the big rocks in, right? They did this in Sunday school all the time, right? The big rocks fit in the mason jar, and then you put all the pebbles in. The big rocks were find somebody, because I was, I've neglected to say, obsessed with love and romance. And I just remember watching like Sleeping Beauty as a little kid. And I think like Prince Philip was my imaginary friend all through elementary school. I was always just obsessed with this whole, like, somebody will come sweep you off your feet. That's what brings you happiness. You have to be this person, be the person you want to marry. And so that was always just like blinders onto that for sure. And then have a family. And then all the other creative, fun stuff had to fit in. They had to be the small rocks after you put the big rocks into the mason jar.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to be a Mormon. You're going to find your Mormon Prince Charming. You're going to marry him in the temple, have lots of kids, and then glorify God through song and motherhood.
Yep.
Basically. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other important stories kind of in your high school years that shaped your faith or shaped your Mormon story or developed cracks in your faith? Anything else about your Mormon story prior to kind of Shaye coming back from his mission?
One crack, it kind of circles back to what I was talking about earlier, but I do remember I worked at this ice cream shop when I was in high school, really safe part of town. And I was working alone one day, which I'm kind of surprised they had me do. And these scary guys came in. And thankfully, nothing happened. They didn't touch me or anything, but they told me they were going to rape me. And I was so scared. And these guys were, I don't know, maybe they were on something. I don't know what the story was. At the time, I thought these guys are skinheads. They had their heads shaved and they just looked really scary. And thankfully, a customer came in, nothing happened. But I remember being just this whole narrative I'd been taught. If you are virtuous, if you are modest, you're safe. You're safe. And I can only imagine how that would affect someone. I know so many are the victims of abuse. And so I don't mean to make this a big deal, but in my mind, I was like, why would someone even see me and think that? Why would that even cross someone's mind? I was wearing a shirt up to here, completely modest. I knew that I'd been virtuous. And it was kind of one of these weird, like, experiences where this Mormon method of you are blessed for doing this didn't happen. And so it reinforced my fear of the world and all of these things I've been taught, right? About, kind of this weird thing on the binary that women are these like, almost like asexual passive creatures and men are these like scary, scary werewolf predators. And I thought, what did I do wrong? So that was weird. And thankfully was just kind of a bad moment. But I know that happens to women. And
you felt like it was your fault. You must have done something wrong.
I couldn't think of anything I could have done wrong.
To unleash the werewolves.
I was just like, I was really surprised by that. And it made me think about a lot of things differently. Around that same time I was in like, high school leadership, like student government. And we went to Girls State. And they taught us all about self-defense. And they were very, these are high school juniors, I think. And they said, if you ever find yourself in a situation, it's your job to survive. It's not your job to preserve your virtue. And just all these things, all of a sudden I was going, this is kind of messed up. This culture that I grew up in. And So yeah, I think that was maybe budding
Messed up
feminism.
Messed up way.
The some of the things in the purity culture that put the blame on women for certain situations.
Like getting raped or assaulted or
Yes.
even having sex.
And the idea that your virtue, that's just all I ever heard, right? Your virtue is this very important thing. You can't lose it. If you lose it, you are, just all the bad, like stereotypical things people say, the chewed gum or the, even like don't give out kisses like pretzels, stuff like that was just like, oh, like I'm a commodity and I need to save this commodity for the person that I'm going to be with forever. And I'm not saying that's all bad, by the way, but like the idea that your commodity is bad, you choosing how you engage with the world in a physical way is good. That's like sovereignty over your body. But the idea that you're a commodity, bad. Yeah.
Okay.
Did that bring to your life a lot of fear then? Because it feels like, on a level, the deep core belief that's being questioned in that moment is I can control other people's behavior through the way I dress, through the way I talk, through the way I present myself. And then you have this moment where, it's beyond your control. You are doing the things and you have a moment of like, I guess it just happens. And if it just happens, then what does that mean? Did it play through in a fear wave for you? Did it sink in to a point where fear was a little bit more present from there? Was it something that you kind of, did you internalize it or find something you did wrong? So to maintain control, like how did you process that?
Yeah, I feel like what really ended up happening was there's some gaslighting involved because as I talked about it, which I didn't talk about it a lot, but I remember going home to my family just being shooken up. And they were like, that's probably not really what happened. And I think you're remembering it wrong. And you weren't unsafe. It was really fine. And I was like, but I realized nothing happened, but I really did feel unsafe. And so there was sort of a minimizing that happened. And I think that does happen a lot when women have concerns pretty much about anything.
Like, they thought they're protecting you by downplaying it.
Yes. One of the ideas I grew up with was if you say you went to therapy about something, that could actually do more damage because then you're tuned into this and you develop this victim mentality. And so, yeah. And again, I know this is, I am downplaying it too, because I just know this is just a scary, weird, like verbal interchange. Things happen that are permanent and completely life altering. This wasn't that for me. It was just like, I don't understand. I'm operating the way I'm supposed to. People aren't reacting, just like you're saying. And also having that dismissed and kind of going, that's interesting. Like, I'm not being listened to. But there was something in me. I was old enough to realize there's something not right. Like, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. So as you're graduating from high school, I guess Shane's on his mission while you're graduating from high school. Do you want to talk about you guys developing feelings for each other before Shay's mission and
Yes.
and that? Or are there other parts of your story, Amanda, that you want to share before we get to that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Nope.
Right.
I think we covered it.
How'd you all meet?
I'll tell my part and you can tell yours, I guess. So we had a group of friends that would go out on Sunday to rest homes and sing hymns. And it was kind of like a service thing we did that we thought would brighten people's lives. And it was a good experience. So, but anyway, that's how I actually met Amanda. She was there and
singing at a retirement
So
community?
wholesome.
That's so wholesome in high
So
school.
wholesome.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the kind of kids we hung out with. Yeah.
yeah, really good friends that
Yeah.
we grew up with kids who thought and dressed and did everything we did, right?
Earnestly, like kids that were like earnestly in this, and some of them, are to this day. Yeah.
So yeah, I just remember seeing Amanda, and then I'm thinking I'm going on a mission. I'm timing it in my mind, like if maybe she gets to know me. Maybe by the time I get back, she'll still be there. And so,
I was 15, and you were 18.
She was a few months shy of her 16th birthday. Okay, a year,
Which is true, actually. Yeah, I think I was a few months shy at my 16th birthday.
So, but of course I wouldn't date her until she was 16. So.
Oh, absolutely not. But you did take me on my first date, which is really sweet. Gave me my first kiss. And yeah, just super good Mormon kids. You went on your mission a couple months after I turned 16. But I was like, you gave me a little locket with our pictures in it. I wore it every day the first year you were gone.
She still has it.
I do. I still have
Oh,
it.
this is the sweetest story, honestly. And I love that it's like you have you share so much of that stage of life then, that you have this witnessing of each other during that time as part of your story.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And I recognized really early on, Shaye was not any of these things that people, I just never.
It wasn't a werewolf.
No, to this day, which this makes a lot of sense, I have never heard him say anything objectifying about women ever, which now I'm like, that makes sense. But at the time I thought, Shaye respects women. He always respected me, not just my body, my thoughts, and total safety. If anything, maybe I was a bad influence.
Horrible.
So,
how so? I know you're joking.
I'm mostly joking, but Shaye was just,
I was the one that's like, we can't make out too long, Amanda. We'll go to the bishop and
Yes.
we'll have to talk about this.
Yes.
And Amanda was what?
She was the wolf.
I was the werewolf.
No,
Well, Shaye had the prophet
I did.
expectation
mantle.
of like
Yeah.
this could really
Yes.
play
Yes,
out.
you're absolutely right. Like I had just so much pressure, but no, I always felt like it was my responsibility to make sure that I didn't cross the line, right? So.
Oh yeah. And your mission, that was imagine a little 16-year-old, like sweet little Mormon girl with a super high voice like this all the time. That was me, right?
A romantic.
Oh, total. Oh my
too.
gosh. Yes. And so you going on your mission, I just drove all my friends crazy while he was gone. Cause it was just always, anyway, I thought about you every day, wrote every week. Shaye was a super good missionary.
I mean, how many guys have a girl write an album about them on their mission?
Yeah.
Wait, so he would have come home from his mission as you were graduating from high school. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was timed like perfectly. But
Yeah, that's actually not normal for a Mormon girl. Usually it's like they meet as freshmen at BYU.
Yeah.
The guy goes on a mission, the girl waits. Now it's different because all the girls are going on missions too.
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
but generally you would have been, the average Mormon girl would have, if she waited for a missionary, she would have waited for her missionary while she was in college. So you finding a missionary and waiting for him while you're in high school, that's actually a relatively unique Mormon story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what it is about St. George. There's quite a few. We knew quite a few couples in the same situation.
Okay.
And I think it's that wholesomeness, like you find your penguin and you wait for your penguin.
I love that. I've not heard the penguin thing.
I haven't either.
That's
Well,
very,
isn't it true that penguins like mate for life? I'm pretty
think
sure.
so.
Maybe I'm just
I'm
hallucinating.
going with it. I'm going.
Oh, he's liking it. Does that stunt your high school experience, Amanda? Because you're literally, when you could be dating other boys or like having fun, or did you go find a way to have fun and date anyway, even though you were waiting for
That's
your
a good
missionary?
question.
Yeah, Shaye said, please don't wait for me, which I kind of half listened to that because I was just smitten. I was totally, hopeless romantic, right? So I did date and I did have good experiences. So I don't know if it stunted. I don't really think it did. If it did, it was just me and my obsessive romantic state, right? Which that couldn't be helped. That probably would have happened no matter what. And it was really good for me. Like, I guess, I don't know. I kind of see it both ways, but with Shaye, it was a positive experience. I would sit down to write these letters and I'd be like, okay, I wanted to be so faith promoting, right? The last thing I wanted to do is distract Shaye. And it was interesting. Before he left, I went on Pioneer Trek, and my ma and pa. I think probably all the listeners would know, but it's kind of like pioneer larping, and you push a hand cart.
Trek is Mormon Pioneer London.
Yes, and the women's pull the men leave them, and they have to push the handcar up the hill by themselves, and then everyone says, this is what childbirth will be like. Anyway, it's kind of funny. But I had this ma and pa who were like the adults that were supervising our group, and they gave me super good advice, actually. They were returned mission presidents, right? So the the father had been a mission president. And I said, I don't want to distract a missionary. Like, I know this is the most important thing Shaye was doing. And he said, go out in the woods with a notebook and pray, and God will tell you what to do. And he goes, don't pay attention to what other people are saying. Just go out, write stuff down. You'll know what to do. There's not necessarily right or wrong. And so I did. And, I just felt like all this stuff was coming to me. I was just like writing everything down. And I felt like, okay, I can be supportive. I can be, someone that helps Shaye. So I don't know. Did I do a good job?
Supportive how?
Just sending encouragement and not distraction. Yeah. So I wouldn't tell Shaye what was going on if I was dating someone else or something, which actually didn't really happen for the first year. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it matured me kind of fast in some good ways.
It kind of, if you're all of a sudden, you know who your husband's going to be, and you're preparing for his return so you can get married, but you're a junior or senior in high school, it means you're thinking about marriage by the time you're anticipating your actual marriage by the time you graduate high school and are 18.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're preparing for wifehood as a junior in high school.
I was, yeah. Yeah, straight
versus
up.
just having fun and dating up a storm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about your education, though? What were you thinking about your career and your education?
So my patriarchal blessing told me I would receive a special education, and I wasn't sure what that meant, but I loved school, and so anyway, and then I got into BYU, which let me back up.
BYU Provo.
So if I back up, this achievement mentality, whatever, I had a lot of disappointments in high school, and I ended up just like basically starting college early. I didn't literally graduate early, but I got my associate's degree the same time I graduated from high school. So I was kind of like, I don't know. I was trying to like get through things fast. I always had this mentality of like, I can't waste time. I know I'm going to have a family. I need to be a wife and mom. So if I want to get stuff done, I got to get it done now. So anyway, my plan was to go into music, and then I went to BYU. Music was, for me, not fun there at all. I felt like, everyone was really talented. So I was like, oh gosh, that whole create because you want to, not because you're good at things, that squashed that because people are amazing out there. So that was one problem. And then I'd always loved English and literature. So I started taking, going into that major. And yeah, so anyway, to back up to the part where I'm kind of all over the place, education was always something important to me, but I was on the clock. The stopwatch was ticking, and I had to get through it fast if I was going to get an education because I was going to be a wife and mom. That was my mentality at the time.
So you decided you were going to, well, I think it's worth noting that, there's obviously Juilliard and Berklee School of Music and like really top tier music college or university experiences, but BYU's got a pretty intense music program.
Yeah.
Probably nationally recognized. Is that fair to say?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was never formally in the program, just to be clear. I was like going in as a junior, freshman age, taking music classes and going, okay, never mind. This isn't for me. So. But
with all the orchestras, all the bands, all the choirs.
Yeah.
BYU is a very musical school.
It is. And it's cool what they do there. And I was in women's chorus for a year.
That's a big deal.
It was fun. We sang in, devotionals and things like that. So I really enjoyed that.
General conference? Did you sing in general conference?
I didn't. I didn't get that opportunity, no.
Okay. So were you at BYU when Shaye comes home?
Yeah, shortly after he came home. And so you should probably talk about what a good missionary you were. He was just such a good missionary. He didn't have time to write me. And then at some point I was like, forget this. I'm going to go and...
That's her excuse anyway.
You fell in love with somebody else.
No, I wouldn't say that. I wanted to be chased, right? It was sort of this, I wanted someone to chase me. And I was like, let's see if Shaye has the chops to do that.
He had to earn you.
Yes. Which again, I'm like, is that really the way we want our girls to see themselves as a
shake
a 9-cow wife or whatever that needs to be chased down?
Well, Hannah, but you were wearing the locket, right?
After the first year, I think I took it off.
Uh-oh.
My mom had a heart-to-heart and said, listen, there's a big world out there.
Yeah.
You should see
Stop
if...
writing too. So.
Yeah, you stopped writing. You were just being a good missionary.
You're being very focused.
I was.
Yeah.
I was trying to save the world and fulfill my patriarchal blessings, so that I would have a life after. So.
Yeah.
Trying to save your soul and also optimize
and everybody else.
your journey of your soul to profit.
And I was aware of Shaye's, I mean, not that I'd ever read your patriarchal blessing, but his family talked pretty openly. So I was aware that leadership was something that they were all expecting. And I kind of had mixed feelings about that because I could tell Shaye was like, he was never like, yeah, so there's this thing and I'm going to work hard towards this. He kind of was always like, yeah.
I kind of have like a mental breakdown just before leaving, like talking to her, saying goodbye, but also like trying to convey the pressure I had without trying to be too descriptive. And it was just like...
Because you're not supposed to share the details of the patriarchal blessing, right?
It was just so much, like I just going into it. So yeah, I stopped writing pretty quickly, just like a focus and thinking I was doing the right thing. And I came home and she was dating somebody else and we had to put an end to that. So I had to go date somebody else and then she got jealous and so...
Did he pursue you? Did he pursue you adequately?
Obviously.
Yeah. Well, I took her like on dates and she had no interest. Like, I'm like,
I
what's
was
going
mean.
on?
I don't know. I was going through a thing. Okay?
I didn't care though. I was like, no, this will
You
work.
knew this was going to happen.
I did. Like I learned how to be really confident in my mission and just like push through things. And I'm
Well,
like,
and one thing that's weird, sometimes I'm not sure how to frame this exactly, but all of these spiritual experiences around, so this, I don't know if every Mormon's like this, maybe it was my hopeless romanticity, whatever. But I felt like there was all these stories about like, you have your person, you're like one flame, your penguin. And if you're in alignment, then all these things will like come into place. So I really believed that. And it was interesting because I had a family member that had an experience. So this gets interesting, right? Where family members have experiences for each other, that I was going to marry Shaye. Very definitive. I was dating someone else at the time and I was like, you're overstepping. I need to figure things out for myself. Shaye pursued me. I was kind of mean, like, well, I'm going to BYU. So, you basically were like, so are you telling me to move on? And I said, yeah, I'm telling you to move on. And then flash forward like maybe 6 months. And I was no longer dating anybody, kind of in like one of those rough, like pivotal places. And I was at a fireside. This is still like clear as day to me. And I just was like, it was one of those moments of openness. Like, God, tell me what to do. I do not know what is good for me. I don't know anything. Tell me what to do. And it was like a voice talked in my head and said, you need to call Shaye and apologize. You made a mistake. You're going to get married. It was just like that. And it was not like anything I'd ever experienced before, because it was just like this very clear voice, unemotional even. Like, I'm admitting to hearing voices in my head. This is good. But I was just like, it felt like pure knowledge. Like, I have to do this. I went home and called Shaye, and Shaye was like, I just started dating someone. And I was like, dang it. But then we just started talking again. And I knew from that experience, like I felt like, yeah, this is my person. So my family member's experience was oddly validated by that. And so, yeah. And you had similar experiences, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm like, no, I was forced into this. No, I'm just kidding. No, I definitely, I remember just having an impression on my mission that I was supposed to marry her. It's so hard looking at things like that because it's just, you don't know.
What does it mean now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that confirmation
then.
bias? Is that alignment? Is that, and I still.
Or is it God? Is
it God?
Yeah.
But maybe not in the sense of how we think it is. Maybe the whole world's experiencing this, right? So it's just like those kind of thoughts you have. But it was definitely, there's few things in my life I was certain about, and one of them was that I wanted to marry Amanda. So
It was inevitable.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Shamanda is inevitable.
Yeah.
yeah, it was before the foundations of this world. And so, yeah.
So how old are you when you get married?
I was 19 and Shaye was 21.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Babies.
All right. And St. George Temple?
Yep.
Guess what?
What?
My parents were married in the St. George Temple.
Oh, is that right?
It's a beautiful temple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. A lot of history. Yeah.
All right. And anything about your wedding or marriage that's worth talking about? Temple stuff? Anything? Was it a positive time, positive experience?
I would say so. I would say with that hopeless romantic lens, I hear a lot of women talking about going through the temple and being traumatized by it. I was just like, this is the preamble to my sealing to Shaye, like, and the whole, the way they did it at the St. George Temple, the time at least, was that you were waiting on the other side of the veil. And I knew that. I didn't know what anything else meant. And everyone was just very, things are different in the temple and some things will seem a little different. And so I was just kind of like, well, as long as Shaye's on the other side of the veil, I'm just going to, go for that. And so it was all framed in this eternal marriage idea, which was, of course, something I was thrilled about. And so I would say it was positive. And I don't know. I just remember our wedding, like there was just tons of fanfare is how I felt. Being in my cute little Mormon character, but I was the oldest grandchild. And so it was kind of like I was the first of my friends to get married. It was
setting the example for the family. And
yeah. I just remember it was a day of pure joy. Like it just felt like bright white, pure joy. Yeah.
And then how had you discussed what the rest of your life would be like? Like, did you have moments where you were like, this is the way our life's going to be, and the typical sort of milestones would be, Shaye would figure out his career, they'd have babies, you'd have babies quickly, Amanda would stay on with the kids, and then eventually, you guys would become mission presidents and then general authority, and wife, and eventually assume the apostleship, basically. Like, no, I'm making that up, but like,
yeah, no, it's interesting because I think like that sounds, talking about my patriarchal blessing was something I didn't even feel comfortable talking about with Amanda.
Yeah.
I didn't like the idea that it was a lot of pressure. Like she was aware of it, of course, but it's just like, it didn't, like my family already did that for me. Does that make sense? Like we got married in the temple, and then a few of the siblings have said, oh my gosh, like, could you feel that spirit? These guys are really elect people. And that's all being like, oh yeah. So it's like, we're kind of put on this pedestal of like, we were on this path of righteousness, but it's like, it was so uncomfortable because you're like, I'm just me, I don't want to be seen as anything more than who I am. And
it's so weird that something that maybe some would look at as just made up, like just you happen to have a patriarch who happened to say this thing and it got written in a letter, but then your family finds out, and then it like weighs on you and shapes the next decade or two of your life. And not just what you put on yourself, but what all your family members are putting on you.
Everyone else is experiencing.
Like, it's weird how something someone would say is made up could be such an influence in your lives.
Yes. There's not an option in our faith to say, could the patriarch be wrong? Right? Because that's not faith promoting. It has to be right. So if it's right, there's two options. It doesn't happen because your agency, or it doesn't happen because it's going to happen in the next life. But of course that doesn't work with a lot of things. Like I'm looking at my mission going, me seeing people get sealed in the temple, that's the next life. Like it's the way it was written was so descriptive to this 2 years. I'm going to serve as this 19-year-old boy. Right. So things like that are hard. And so you just kind of put it on a shelf, you put it away, it's like, so as I'm checking the boxes, like things are not happening, of course, that just puts even more of a burden on me, right?
What wasn't happening?
Well, my mission, not seeing this family. I think also my blessing talked about, we get into early marriage, people sensing my worth and putting me in these very important callings right away. They could just see
You would
it.
have expected what?
Sorry?
You would have expected to be a young bishop or an elder's quorum
yeah.
president or-
Well, it doesn't say, it just said that people will sense your value. You'll be, of course, I'm looking at it like, well, if I'm eventually getting to the highest councils or, however that
Thomas
works.
S. Monson was made a bishop when he was 25.
Yes.
So I need to be within 2-3 years of like 25, be a bishop by then.
Yeah. And you would hear those stories happen.
I'm not making that up.
But it's not, I know. Yeah.
No, I'm saying you did wonder those things?
Of course.
Oh, okay.
Of course. I thought like, I saw people around me, sometimes that were younger, put in positions that I'm thinking, I taught gospel doctrine, but that was like in the married ward. And then, and in some ways it was so relieving too. At the same time, I'm like, oh yes, I don't have to be this person that people view as like so important or
It sounds so complicated.
yeah.
It really like almost a split self or a paradox thing where
Yeah.
yeah.
I just want to name this episode "The Tyranny of a Patriarchal Blessing."
Absolutely.
I feel like that patriarch like broke code.
No,
No?
he did his job.
Well, with specifics. I mean, my understanding was the idea is to make it kind of general
I've heard
enough,
of people
no?
being promised that they would be one of the 2 prophets killed in the streets of Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Michael Quinn was told he'd be an apostle. Like
Really?
there's a long history of really specific patriarchal blessings
Yes.
that end up terrorizing people.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. You'd only hear about it if people step away, right? Then they go, yeah, my blessing said the same thing. And you find out everyone's kid was like bound for like some great, and I'm going, then it's like that scene in Toy Story where he's watching the TV and he realizes he's just a toy when he sees the real Buzz Lightyear. And but it was kind of like, well, no, it was a relief. But like, I'm just realizing like, oh my gosh, people, yes, it might be unusual, but it happens. Like you said, there's lots of people. I mean, how do you explain my older siblings who also had these paths that I'm not seeing being fulfilled? So I'm thinking maybe your family that was so choice and so elect is just not, the Satan's just gotten a hold of us and things are not, you know what I mean? So it's just so many thoughts you have to think about, so much cognitive dissonance. So
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like the woman who's told she'll multiply and replenish the earth and she's infertile.
That's right.
oh yeah.
You'll marry a righteous priesthood holder, but you end up having maybe a wayward time and you marry a non-Mormon and then you're tormented the rest of your life. Like,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So someone talk about,
go ahead.
no, I was going to say, I saw someone like talking about on the internet how their patriarchal blessing warned him about all these women that will take your virtue. And he's like, well, it's a good thing because I'm gay. And I'm thinking like, how do you explain that? Like, was that real? Is that, was the patriarch wrong? Like, and you think that has to be happening all the time, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a very, when I look at patriarchal blessings, I'll just be honest. I'm not a fan. I don't think that's something that we should be telling people on top of already being God's most chosen people that here's your life set out for you for the rest of your life. So
Yeah. It's undue influence. It's harmful. It can be harmful. For me, it was, it's the opposite. It's like, oh, I still haven't tried alcohol. Like I'm 53. My patriarchal blessing says, if you obey the word of wisdom, you'll live long and be healthy. So like, if as long as it's benign enough and positive enough, it can just kind of maybe, well, some would say keep you from having a lot of fun. Other people would say keep you out of trouble. But like, yeah, sure. It can be a double-edged sword, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so so you got married and you weren't getting the callings you thought you would. Let me ask really quickly, did you discuss either before your marriage or early in your marriage your gender dysphoria with Amanda? Did that come up at all?
No. And the reason it didn't is because by this point I already framed it as something that it's like it was taken care of in the sense that like I had this Father's blessing and I went on a mission and I was on this covenant path and things were happening as I thought. So I just thought like, I viewed it as something like, it didn't really affect us because it was like, I loved Amanda, right? There wasn't like anything with that, but I didn't, even when you say gender dysphoria, I didn't have the language for it. It was, if you were to look at it back then, it was like this file in the back of my head that I didn't know how to make sense of, that I would just dissociate from. So
Yeah.
no, I didn't feel like a need to, because it didn't feel like it affected.
Because you were attracted to her and
Yeah. And it didn't like, it's not like it showed up in our marriage in any way either. Like it was something that
Not
like
at all.
I just, there was that fragmented part that you talk about that was a part I hated. I hated me. I hated being me. But
While you were married?
Always.
Early in your marriage?
I hated being me always. And the way that I work with that is I would be the person that other people thought I was. So I just would be that person. I try to be the person that says, "Oh, Shaye, he's honest," or "Shaye does this," or whatever they would say. I try to be that, right? So it's not to say like I don't know. I look back on that and I go, it was just so much torture. So no discussion. But then I also thought, I always viewed it as something like that, for my father's blessing, that it's something that I would overcome. So I viewed it as a process at this point, that like, this is my weight to bear in this life, that through the atonement that I could overcome it. And I think another part of that was really big was that by talking about it, that it would thwart this plan that God had laid out for me. Going back to anything I say or do is permanent. That somehow by talking about it, that if that were just even discussed in a family, like that would leak out. And then all of a sudden the church in their archives would put a name next to me going, he failed. It's like, it was the weirdest feeling. But it's like, I had to be so protective of like that part of me. And I didn't think it felt like it was outside of the church's requirements. So.
And Amanda, did you notice anything, either any signs or tells of any gender dysphoria, or did you notice depression or compartmentalization? Were there any signs of like something going on, or was it just like, I've got my Peter priesthood, righteous priesthood holder, and we're living the dream?
Yeah, there was absolutely no sign of gender dysphoria. And I know that a lot of people, there are certain behaviors which are totally fine. Shaye there's never anything like that inclination towards women's clothing or nothing like that. And I would say even early in our marriage, I don't think I picked up on signs of depression or anything. We were just like, fresh out of the gate, just sort of like, pursuing life. It was this like new beginning. And I think it was later that I did notice the depression for sure. I had no idea what it was. So I had no inkling whatsoever that Shaye experienced this.
Yeah, I remember early in our marriage, it was like we had our marriage, everything to look forward to. And it's hard to explain I wish everybody could experience gender dysphoria. I really do. Like if they could just experience for 1 month of their life, you'd be a lot less willing to judge others and understand what that experience is like. People, they can't rationalize it, so they just kind of throw it off. It's like, that's just, there's something wrong with you. But my experience, I remember like having that incongruence of like not wanting to be me. And I remember I was going home, I pulled the car over from work and I just sobbed because I thought like, wow, why am I experiencing this again? I've done everything right. And then I was worried that you had noticed that, and I kind of came home and I had to wipe my tears and just try to act like everything was normal. And there were so many times I wanted to talk to her about this, but again, like just having the language, like just my parents saying, "Are you gay?" or this, and like I don't even know how to describe what I'm experiencing because it doesn't affect that part of me. And I mean, as far as my traction, right? And so it was that I didn't have words, and it wasn't until later in life that I came across the word gender dysphoria, and it changed my life because I thought, oh my gosh, there's other people just like me. And
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So obviously, in a Mormon marriage, maybe more so than the average U.S. lived experience, kind of the more conservative, high demand religions are going to have very traditional households that are very gendered.
The roles are very gendered.
The gender roles are very specific. The woman has long hair. The woman should be staying home. The woman should be feminine. The woman should be raising kids. The husband should be masculine. He should work. He should provide. The woman does the household chores predominantly. The husband takes care of the yard and, does sports, whatever. What were I would wonder whether such a gendered structure that the average Mormon couple would live might exacerbate or bring to the front gender dysphoria more than other more egalitarian, progressive, liberal kind of. So can you talk about how that traditional gendered Mormon couple sort of structure, what thoughts or desires or dissonance it brought to you? Is there any specificity you can bring to how that life, that Mormon gendered life, brought to your mind the dissonance? In what areas? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think just this. Well, I mean, to answer the first part of your question, no question in my mind that did it make it worse. You know, the way we view gender roles in our faith. Yeah, I mean, I was a priesthood holder, right? I'm set on this path of greatness as a priesthood holder, and this is how I get love. This is how I get acceptance, and this is how you get value, right? In Mormonism is to play this role. Like it's a priesthood obligation to serve a mission. That wasn't even an option to me. So I didn't think about it in that lens, but it's just like, you're just playing a part, and you're playing that part so convincingly well until you can't take it anymore. And that's often what happens to a lot of, queer members, is it becomes too painful.
Were there things about her role as a Mormon woman that you were wanting to be able to take part in? And were there things about your role as a Mormon man that you didn't want to?
Yeah.
What were those?
Sure. Yeah. It's fascinating. I guess back up a little bit, but like my whole life, every stage of my life, it was like I was watching the other role as a child, whether it was the girls playing jump rope, or it was like, oh, now, this is what teenage life would have been like. And this is what it's like. So of course, in marriage, I'm thinking, it's not that like I envied in the sense that like I don't look at Amanda like I love her. She's my person. So it's not like I thought like I wanted her to be her. It's just more that the burden of what I was expected to be, it was so hard. And I know a lot of people push that off and go, well, that's just how society creates a construct. But trying to explain to someone like how much deeper it goes than that, it's so hard. It's so hard to explain to people in the same way that, if we're talking about attraction, is when someone's like, well, they'll tell someone who's gay, like, don't, not everything's about sex, or like that. You're right. It's not. You're the one that's making it about that. There's so much more layers to how you love someone to show up. But in the same way there is with identity, there's so many more layers and shades of gray of how an individual wants to be seen and shown in this world. And so when we create that box, it creates suffering. We say, this is what you are to be. And our faith does that very well, and always has. With the proclamation of the world, I remember that came out. I remember that just being kind of painful, like that my spirit of who I was before I came here, the solidified that is eternal. It's like, so what happens when you tell someone who suffers with gender dysphoria that is, you think, man, I just need to die then, because that's how I can be relieved of the suffering, so I can be okay being me. But then there's also this conundrum of like, well, if I'm not who I am now, who would I be without this? In the next life, who would I be without this experience of just connecting to the core self? I'm not sure if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
Totally does.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to help people understand, was it that you felt like you wanted to look more like a woman, present more like a woman, be a mom? Or was it, I don't want to be a dad, I don't want to be masculine, I don't want to be the primary breadwinner? Are there aspects of appearance or role or activities that you were either loathing or aspiring to that were out of your reach?
Or even attributes.
Yeah.
We definitely
trying to put kind of meat on the bones of what you particularly were either not wanting to be or wanting to be.
I never wanted to be male, ever. So the best way to explain that is that I didn't. So every category, whether that's growing up, that's what you do when you go to school, how men and women show up in the world differently, whether that's how having children, all those things. Does that answer your question? Like, it's just like everything.
Yeah. And this is what I've observed. So we've got this gender binary, right? And people behave all sorts of different ways within that. But it's never been an option in your mind to explore this female side of the binary. So I think at most what you've been able to do is, this does not fit. This does not feel right. This is not me. This is something I'm having to enact this role.
Yeah. And what's hard too is I've been socialized to be male, right? So in elementary I was teased as being more effeminate, right? But then I when I was able to play,
You like course corrected, like
Yes.
you corrected based on the data you were
yeah.
getting that you were probably
Exactly.
not safe or.
yes, absolutely. And in many ways it worked, because it's like I was also attracted to women. So if that's what, that's the person I need to be, then that works. But for many people it doesn't, though, and that's why we see such a high suicide rate among queer people, right? And so it's hard for me to look at my life in our marriage and go, that should have been me. It's more of like the feeling of like, it's been so painful to be me. I don't even know at the stage I'm at right now is, what do I want? I don't know, because my whole identity was wrapped up into this from the day I came to this planet. And that's what's so hard is, you hear people in testimonies saying, I don't know who I would be without this. They say that because their identity has been given to them. They're told who they are. They don't even know who they are, and I didn't know who I was. And so hopefully that answers your question, but it's hard to think of things like, other than just explaining it the way I did, but also understand that there's been a real socialization that I actually was proud of, that no one would know this, right? I was proud of that. But at the same time, I hated that I convincingly created a life where people won't believe me, not just the way I look, just not just my height, not just the way that, but also that
your presentation, your expression,
everything. Yeah. It's like, I'm not proud of my accent. I'm not proud of that. If I would have just been allowed to, express that part of me as a child, maybe I would have figured out where I landed, but I don't know.
Because you would have had that connection to yourself all along to have that exploring process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas right now, it's what I'm hearing from you is like, I'm only just beginning. I've identified, I have a whole life of self-betrayal.
Yeah.
I have a whole life of ways I don't want to show up, that it's like killing me to show up. And now I'm just beginning to break free from the shame shackles to actually move into a space where, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that's where a lot of my pain is because it's one thing to, and I'm sure we'll get into it, the faith deconstruction, but it's just like, what have I done? What it's like I was holding my breath my whole life. And for the first time, I'm taking a breath and going, what do I want? I'm in therapy, and part of my therapy is drawing my feelings. And this actually in the video, but I drew a self-portrait of myself as that child. And I wrote shame on it. And because I'm supposed to draw my shame. And it's like one part of me is that portrait, that little boy, and the other part's just smeared. Because that part of me was that fear that if I were to ever just express that part of me and see what that is all about, that I wouldn't be loved, right? That the love was conditional based off of me playing this role, not only this role, but a very important role within this religion.
That makes me emotional, because I just felt like you just hit the nail on the head of exactly what it is.
Absolutely.
And
restate it.
Well, what Margie was saying about, just I guess what comes to mind is kind of like building on what you were saying, is we don't realize we have this life of conditioning. Like, as a woman, I never thought about how much goes into being a woman. And the same is true of masculinity. But some people are able just to go, nah, don't like masculine dress, I'm going to dress this way. Don't like this, I'm going to do that. But there's a lot of people like Shaye that you aren't inclined to hear as much about, because it's so much more difficult. And I'm not saying it's not difficult. It's difficult for anybody that's navigating this, but there is a whole scaffolding of what it is to be female in this world. I personally think there's much more of a scaffolding to be female, which is why we have so much more phobia around trans women than trans men in a lot of cases, though I'm sure trans men would have their stories to tell. I'm sure there's a lot. There is a performance, there's so much outward and inward construction of what it is to be female. And for someone like Shaye, it's just like, where do you start? So that's maybe where some people have that freedom, feel like they can say, I reject this. This is really what is more in alignment with me. But there's a lot of people that are, you know, kind of stuck with, okay, this part of the binary I don't like, but it's just so scary to go into that other realm. Yeah.
So I guess I'm envisioning at least two parts. Part one is not liking the gender identity that's been assigned to you at birth, and realizing all the ways you don't like how society is wanting you to be, and you're not liking the future that society has laid out for you, and that's all. And then keeping all that silent inside. It sounds like you were a pro at that, and that when you say holding your breath your entire life, it's just living in that sphere, and that's been your primary experience as someone with gender dysphoria, is in that part. Then there's a second part, which is actually exploring things, trying different things, you know, seeing what works and trying different personalities or apparel choices or ways that you want to express yourself. It sounds like that part is just like something just now at age what? You're even starting to contemplate the possibility of, let alone even explore. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like we're in this horrific car crash called what just happened, you know, with your faith deconstruction, and then you start to, it's just a scary thought for anybody coming out of a high control religion and go, who am I? What do I want? And is that even just even like a fear to say that? Who am I? What do I want? You know, it's just, that shouldn't be. I've heard you say in the past that, you know, when you leave something like this, you should come out a better person. You should be coming out thriving. But it's like, why is it that when you leave something like this, that so many people go through so much trauma in so many cases where you have to reconstruct an identity because you never had an identity? It was always tied up into, this is who I am, this is where I came from. And, you know, as we often hear just recently in conference, don't use labels unless they're the labels we give you. You know, this isn't who you are. Yeah. You're a child of God, but essentially what that means is we own you. We're going to tell you who you are. And if you do anything but this, misery, you can't have joy. And that's been my entire life, and I'm sure so many others, of course. So.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to that moment that you shared so like poignantly, pulling over on the side of the road and just really crying, you know, just going back to how heavy it must feel. I mean, you kind of describing your journey as sort of something you've thought about every day. It's something that has followed you. It's this file in the back that you, or whatever, is just, you know, what it has taken for you to do that. You know, what's been taken, how much effort, how much energy, how much like you've had to close down because we know we can't selectively shut down. We don't get to control all of that. So like things that have been lost, things that have, you know, that's just so much to carry. And I really appreciate you putting words to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And so as we're kind of wrapping up this part one, there's one other part that I don't even know how okay it is to address it, but there's this idea within trans discourse, let's just say, of passing, where there's people that for whatever reason about when they transitioned or what their presentation is, even before they transition to themselves or others, but there's this idea of passing or not passing.
And to be clear, we're talking about gender expression here.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. There's something, and we've interviewed, let's just say 6 or 7 people who, transgender individuals on Mormon Stories over the past several years. And in many of those cases, those individuals kind of come across more as what I've heard referred to as passing, where you could kind of go, wow, they probably presented as gay, what some would say would be gay to a lot of people, or had maybe some of the more traditionally perceived, let's just say, feminine characteristics if they're trans females, right? Where you would kind of go, okay, it was probably clear to everybody that this person, was transgender in some way or very uncomfortable with their gender identity. And you could almost say that the gender that they transitioned to, many people would go, yeah, that seems to fit. But then there's sort of a different presentation that someone would, and these are all problematic terms, but somebody would associate as being, let's say in your case, more masculine, like a 5 o'clock shadow, a beard, height, a deeper voice, where it's almost more pronounced, because you would go, I would never have, like, seeing how you present right now, there wouldn't be a tell that you would have gone, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I know I'm just painfully talking around something that I don't even know how to fully describe, but is this something you both are kind of understanding what I'm trying to get at? And is it something that's worth even trying to respond to or address? And I hope I haven't said anything offensive.
No, not at all. I think you're right, though. Gender expression was something I probably afforded myself to express when I was younger. For me, this pivotal point of suicide, saying, am I going to live or die, is I had to decide to try to suppress and kill that part of me. And so I look at that, 10, 11, 12, wherever it was, as this point of like, I need to try to be everything but this, and I need to push this down. And that's what's so interesting is like, we read all these studies where, if you allow a kid to express themselves, like they're going to find out where they land. I never had that. And I doubled down because I just thought, this part of me, the message I got was that this, just by being who I am, it was already a disappointment. It was already something that if I were to express is so at odds with this mission that I have on this planet. And so it's been interesting as we've looked into this, and you see people on so many different shades. There's probably so many people, and that's what's been so fascinating about releasing this video, is how many private messages we've gotten from people who are Catholic and, every faith, every walk of life, going, I can't thank you, because of your video, I was able to talk to my spouse, or I was able to talk about, experiencing attraction to both sexes, and, just things like that. But all these people you wouldn't know, right? It's like I played the part because I had to, because I believed that would save me. So by the time I'm married and everything, it's like I was able to push that down so far that my childhood became kind of like this really dark time that I didn't want to really talk about a lot with this. So
well, and it's complicated too, because imagine we've built a life together, right? We've got kids and this family, and so there's all these things that Shaye's been in pain for all these years, enacting this performance. And I don't say that from a standpoint of deceit, because I don't see it that way at all.
Survival. How about survival?
How about survival?
Deceit, yeah.
And I'm performing as well, just to be clear, right?
Yeah.
We're all performing
right.
our gender roles,
right?
The way I see it. So how this thing that's caused all this pain, we have these 3 beautiful kids that call Shaye daddy, and there's so much that I know that you love about your life. And so it gets real complicated. And the kids would be totally fine, if Shaye were to show up in a different way. But we have this reality that is built on this long suffering that has been hurting you so much. And that's where it just gets real complicated, because, people on the affirming side are like, great, like, awesome, just show up and be yourself. And Shaye's like, oh,
I don't know.
Who is myself?
Yeah.
And how? My goodness. This is one thing I wish people could think about for like 2 seconds that are transphobic. Like these ridiculous things like, oh, people do this for attention, or people do this, I don't know, whatever. The pain and suffering people go through. Like you talk about passing, right? That's like the holy grail in the transgender experience, because I see being transgender as gorgeous, but with the way that trans people are treated in this world, people just want to live their lives. They don't want to show up as trans in a public situation in which they could be in danger, right? So to pass, it means that someone who identifies as trans feminine could go and live a normal life. Doesn't mean that they, we have these entertainers who, like, I'm not going to knock, that are very, we see these like entertainers that are trans women, and they have a certain presentation, but there are trans women working desk jobs. There are trans women in every sort of profession, trans men too. They just want to live a normal life. So that's where, like, that passing in gender expression, people want to make this about, at its worst, some like kink, or that it's about heels and lipstick. It's literally about just existing and not feeling at odds with your own body. Am I saying it?
Just living an authentic, genuine self. Yeah. And
with like all the possibilities
yes.
accessible without having to sacrifice your sense of safety when you reach for one versus the other, right? And I think this is where it's different than sexuality, because there's this part of gender that can be, people can tell. There's a tell there that it's private though. On a level there is no sense of, like, sexuality can be held in the workplace where people may not know, So if you're not out, or if you're not, or you don't want to be out necessarily at work, and let's just put out there, like, we want a world where everyone can show up in all ways, being safe and celebrated, and, but there is an aspect of gender where there is a safety issue. And then, so gender expression, you're like, I'm not sure I feel safe to gender express. Like, I'm not sure I'll actually, and that's something that's different, And so oftentimes the things you have to weigh versus, like, authenticity versus safety, or it gets really complicated and really heavy in a way that I just think if people could really see and feel for what's at play, maybe it would change the way people show up.
Yeah, way more compassion, because if you're in a cisnormative, heteronormative world, which we all are, you just don't, if you're cisgender, you don't ever think about this stuff. You don't think about what it would be like for people to perceive you in a way that is not authentic to you. I could understand it theoretically, but not personally until this touched our lives. And then you see it everywhere. You're like, oh, wow, there's so many different ways to perform female. And I think there's maybe fewer ways to perform male. It's interesting, right? Because anyway, it's a whole thing with this feminist revolution we've been going through, where women can now show up, but it's almost like a devaluing of femininity, where if men show up with femininity, I'm not even talking about sexuality or like, but I'm just, let's say attributes, right? That's something people are still like not comfortable with. And I think it's actually a fear of femininity, wanting to keep that in the binary so that it can be controlled within this patriarchal system. At least that's what it feels like to me.
And I think understanding historically where the binary was created, because I think oftentimes people mistake it that it's like new, or that it's, but really understanding kind of how it emerged and how it was weaponized and used to oppress people. I think that's an important piece, and how oftentimes people I find are like, they think it's like about, people who are non-binary, but it's really about all of us. It's really about how we all are in that performance of gender, whether we identify as cis or not, lose something. We lose something from not feeling like we can have a fully human embodied experience,
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, this is only part one of at least a two-part story, but what I want to say is thank you so much to both of you, to Shaye and to Amanda, for, you both are just really amazing, wise, thoughtful people. But this is a real act of both courage and of generosity, because this is the only way people learn. Silence is the killer, silence is the enabler, but stories are what educate and validate and empower and heal. And so I'm just so grateful for part one. So thank you both for everything so far.
Thanks for holding space for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Our pleasure. Margie, thank you for being a part of this as well. You make this 20 times better.
Oh, I love you, babe. Thank you.
And part 2, come right back for part 2, because we're going to talk about the YouTube sensation that was the Piano Guys and how you got involved. We're going to talk about your infertility experiences, talk about your marriage, talk about your career being you got to, if you can't have kids, you got to keep pursuing your career. So your journey with perfectionism and performance and becoming a woman professor in a Mormon world where women are discouraged from working, but then you in vitro fertilization. And then we're going to talk about how all this comes to a head with faith stuff and COVID. And then where you all have landed, and Margie's favorite part, maybe even a little bit of reconstruction, to boot. So that's what's coming in part 2. Anything I'm leaving out for what we're going to cover next episode?
No,
I think you about covered it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us on this episode, and come right back for part 2 of our epic interview with Amanda and Shaye Scott. Thanks, everybody.